She walked straight up to a stranger, pointed her finger at him, and said in front of everyone, "Were you checking me out?" The man didn't flinch, didn't blush, didn't apologize. He looked her dead in the eye and said 7 words that made her stomach drop. What happened next at that lakeside resort didn't just change 2 lives, it exposed a truth about success, loneliness, and what we miss when we stop seeing people. This is the story Victoria Hartwell never planned to tell, but the one she'll never stop thinking about. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. Victoria Hartwell didn't walk into a room, she arrived. There was a difference, and everyone who had ever worked for her or worked around her understood it instinctively. When Victoria moved, people adjusted. Assistants straightened their posture. Managers rehearsed their sentences. Interns stopped breathing until she passed. It wasn't something she demanded. It was something she had built. Over 18 years, one carefully constructed moment at a time. At 38 years old, she was the founder and CEO of Wellness Group, a company that had grown from a single website selling organic supplements out of a studio apartment in Chicago to a billion-dollar empire with 4 distribution centers, 12 product lines, and a headquarters in downtown Denver that took up 3 full floors of glass and polished concrete. Forbes had called her the woman who turned self-doubt into a business model. Inc. magazine had put her on the cover twice. CNBC had interviewed her on a Tuesday morning. And by Wednesday afternoon, her stock had jumped 9 points. She was, by every measurable standard, extraordinary. And she was absolutely, completely, bone-deep exhausted. Not the kind of tired that a good night of sleep fixes. Not the kind that a week in the Maldives or a spa day in Scottsdale touches. This was the kind of exhaustion that lives behind your eyes. The kind you carry in your shoulders at 3 in the morning when the building is quiet and the contracts are signed and the quarterly reports say everything is fine, and somehow, you still feel like you're one wrong word away from falling apart. That was the exhaustion Victoria was running from when she drove 3 hours from Denver with nothing but a small overnight bag. Her laptop, she promised herself she wouldn't open. And the kind of bone-grinding need for silence that only people who have been loud for too long will ever understand. The Cedarwood Lake Resort was not the kind of place that Victoria normally chose. It wasn't the Four Seasons. It didn't have a rooftop infinity pool or a Michelin-starred restaurant or a lobby that smelled like money. It was quiet and it was old, and the wooden dock at the edge of the lake creaked when you walked on it. And the pine trees along the shore didn't care who you were or what your company was worth. That was exactly why she'd chosen it. She'd found it by accident, or what she'd thought was an accident. Though her therapist, Dr. Elaine Morse, had once suggested that Victoria didn't really do anything by accident. She'd been driving, no destination, no itinerary, which was already so unlike her that the act of doing it felt vaguely illegal. She'd pulled off the highway when the billboard appeared simple, faded, almost charming in its modesty, Cedarwood Lake Resort. Peaceful by design. Something in her chest had cracked open, just slightly, at those 3 words. Peaceful by design. She hadn't known peace since 2019. She checked in under her company card and was given a room on the 2nd floor with a window that looked directly over the lake. The woman at the front desk, mid-60s, silver hair, reading glasses on a beaded chain, hadn't recognized her. Victoria had noticed, and the noticing had produced a feeling she couldn't immediately name. It took her until she was unpacking her bag to figure out what it was. Relief. She was relieved that no one recognized her. That told her something she didn't particularly think about yet. The afternoon was warm for September. That particular warmth that Colorado does in the early fall, dry and golden. The kind that sits on your skin like something intentional. Victoria had changed out of her blazer and into a simple linen shirt. Pale blue, untucked. She'd left her heels in the room and worn flats, which felt vaguely revolutionary. She'd walked to the water's edge and found a weathered Adirondack chair near the dock, and sat in it, both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee from the resort's small cafe. And she had done something she hadn't done in approximately 14 months. Nothing. She sat and she did nothing. For approximately 11 minutes. It was almost working. And then she heard him. Not his voice, not yet. She heard the splashing first. Quick, irregular, the chaotic joy of a small child discovering that water responds to human enthusiasm. She turned, not irritated. Exactly, just present in a way she hadn't quite expected, and she saw them. A man and a boy. The boy was maybe 5, maybe 6, small enough that the orange life jacket strapped around him looked almost comically large, like a piece of flotation equipment wearing a child. He was standing at the shallow edge of the dock, arms windmilling, trying to stomp both feet at the same time into the water's surface. He was so focused on this mission that his tongue was sticking out the side of his mouth in concentration. The man was sitting on the dock itself, legs dangling over the side, bare feet just above the waterline. He was watching the boy, the way people watch things they cannot believe they get to keep. That particular kind of watching, careful and warm and slightly aching around the edges. The look of a person who understands, maybe too well, how fast things can be taken. He wore a plain gray t-shirt that had seen a lot of washings. Dark jeans with a fray at the left knee. No watch. No sunglasses. He had an old canvas backpack sitting beside him on the dock that looked like it had survived something. He was lean in the way that people get lean when they work hard, physically, rather than when they pay someone to train them. And there was something in the set of his shoulders relaxed, in a way that wasn't casual. More like settled, that Victoria noticed before she could decide whether she was noticing. He wasn't wealthy. She could tell that the way she could tell everything quickly, accurately, without pleasure or judgment, just data. The clothes, the backpack, the way he moved, without the particular kind of deliberate ease that money teaches people. He wasn't here for the same reason the other guests were here. She'd already cataloged the other guests, a retired couple from Phoenix, a pair of women in their 40s celebrating something, a man alone at the far table who'd been on a phone call since she arrived. This man was different. He looked like someone who had scraped together something small and specific and was holding it with both hands. She turned back to her coffee. She was not here to observe people. She was here to stop doing that. She was always observing people, always categorizing, assessing, calculating. It was part of what made her brilliant at her job and absolutely terrible at everything else. She lasted another 4 minutes before she looked back. He was still watching the boy. The boy had abandoned the stomping project and was now lying flat and lat on his stomach on the dock, peering over the edge into the water with an expression of deep scientific interest. "Dad," the boy said loudly, with the volume control of someone who hadn't yet learned that thoughts didn't need to be broadcast. "Do you think there are sharks in there? In the lake?" "Yeah, in Colorado." The boy considered this. "Maybe a small one." The man laughed, a real laugh. Short and genuine. The kind that comes up before you can shape it into something presentable. "Colorado doesn't have sharks, buddy. But what if one visited? Sharks can't drive." "Eli, what if it took a train?" There was a pause. "I genuinely don't know what to say to that. You should look it up." "I will absolutely look it up later." "Promise?" "I promise that later tonight I will research whether any Colorado lakes have ever been visited by a traveling shark." The boy seemed satisfied. He went back to peering into the water, probably looking for evidence of advanced aquatic travel. Victoria was smiling before she realized she was doing it. She pressed her lips together, looked away, looked back. She didn't intend to keep watching him. She genuinely didn't. But the problem, the specific, inconvenient, professionally embarrassing problem, was that Victoria Hartwell had spent the last decade surrounded by people who wanted things from her. Her board wanted results. Her investors wanted returns. Her employees wanted job security. Her ex-boyfriend, the last one, Marcus, a venture capitalist with a 100-watt smile and the emotional depth of a spreadsheet, had wanted the idea of her, the status of her, without any interest in the actual weight of what she carried. Everyone wanted something, and here was this man, sitting on a dock with his kid, wanting absolutely nothing from anyone in the world except to watch his son be ridiculous about sharks. There was something almost indecent about it, how simply he existed. She caught him glancing in her direction, at one point, just a glance. Brief, directionless, the kind of look people do when they're taking in their surroundings, without focusing on any particular thing. His eyes passed over her, the way they passed over the tree line, and the far shore, and the boy, now trying to catch something with his bare hands. And Victoria, who had not done anything impulsive since 2018, who ran her entire professional life on calculation and evidence and the measured application of leverage, felt something sharp and automatic move through her. He's looking at me. And then before the slower, more reasonable part of her brain could catch up, she was standing. She was walking. She was crossing the 20 feet of dock between her chair and the man on the planks. And her coffee was still in her hand, and her pulse was doing something she didn't authorize it to do. And she was already talking before she had fully decided to be. She stopped 3 feet from him, close enough to be deliberate, and she tilted her head, and she smiled the particular smile she had. The one that worked in boardrooms and cocktail parties. The smile that said, "I know exactly what's happening here." And she said it. "Were you checking me out?" She said it lightly. She said it like a woman who has never once in her life worried about the answer to any question she chose to ask. She said it like someone who controls the room, even when the room is a lake. The man looked up. She'd expected the fumble, the immediate flush of being caught, the apologetic over-explanation that men gave when they'd been noticed noticing. She'd seen it 100 times. It was, if she was honest, a small and not entirely honorable pleasure, the confirmation that she could still unsettle people, that her presence still registered, that after everything, she was still seen. He didn't fumble. He looked at her fully. Without hurry, the way people look at something they're genuinely trying to understand, and there was no embarrassment in his face. No guilt, no defensive posturing. His expression was calm in a way that wasn't cold, steady in a way that wasn't rehearsed. And then he said it. "Actually, ma'am, I was watching my son." He glanced back at Eli, who had given up on catching things and was now attempting to balance on one foot near the dock's edge with his arms spread wide, which was terrifying. "Eli, 2 feet from the edge," he said. And there was a quiet authority in it, not loud, not alarmed, just certain. The boy adjusted without drama. Then he looked back at her. "You were standing between me and the one person I never want to lose sight of." Victoria Hartwell was not a woman who got flustered. She had negotiated contracts worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. She had fired executives who thought they could bluff her. She had stood in front of investors who told her her business model was cute and walked out with their signatures on 7-figure commitments. She had been underestimated in rooms full of people who should have known better. She did not get flustered. She stood there, beside a lake in Colorado, with a cup of coffee going cold in her hand, and she felt heat move up from her collarbone to her face like a slow tide. And she understood with the kind of clarity that usually only shows up in very quiet moments that she had just been gently, completely, and without any malice whatsoever, put in her place. Not by cruelty, not by dismissal, by someone who simply had his priorities in order and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. She didn't know what to do with that. She started. Stopped. The word hung there like it had never been so poorly launched. He wasn't smiling at her discomfort. That was the thing. There was no triumph in his face, no enjoyment of having reversed her. He just looked at her, the way a person looks at someone who has said something that doesn't quite land. Patient and without judgment. "Sorry," she said, and she meant it. Which surprised her. She paused. "That was a little presumptuous of me." "A little," he agreed. His voice had a quality she couldn't immediately categorize: warm, but not soft. Direct, but not sharp. He picked up his coffee from the dock beside him. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she said, automatically, reflexively, the way she said it 100 times a week. "I didn't ask if you were successful," he said. "I asked if you were okay." She blinked. He said it completely without edge. It wasn't an attack. It was she searched for the word and couldn't find one that fit. Which was itself strange, because Victoria had a vocabulary that bordered on aggressives. It was observational. He was observing her the way she had been observing him. Except that his version of the skill apparently produced different questions. "Dad," Eli called out, having given up on one-leg balancing and moved on to a new project involving 2 sticks and what appeared to be a serious architectural vision. "Dad, I'm building a dock for the shark." "The visiting shark," the man confirmed. "He's gonna need somewhere to park." Smart thinking. He looked back at Victoria. "Daniel," he said, and extended his hand. She took it. "Victoria." "Nice to meet you, Victoria." He said her name simply, without the uptick that people usually gave it when they placed it. Recognized it, began calculating what it meant. He just said it. Her name, like it was a name and not a credential. "And that's Eli," Daniel said, tilting his head toward the boy. "He's 5. He's convinced this lake has an undiscovered ecosystem of traveling wildlife. I've mostly stopped arguing. That's actually a solid theory," Victoria said. Daniel looked at her with a slight genuine surprise. "He'll be thrilled to hear that. Should we tell him?" "Not yet. He's in the middle of construction. You don't interrupt an engineer mid-project." Victoria sat not planning to. Not deciding to. Just her knees bent, and she was sitting on the dock beside him. Cross-legged, which was not something she did in linen pants and flats. But apparently her body had made the choice, independently of her professional judgment. She looked at the lake. He looked at Eli. Eli narrated his building project to no one in particular. "You're not here with family?" he asked. "No, work trip?" I told myself it wasn't. She felt him look at her. Briefly. But my laptop is in my room, and I've already checked my email 3 times since I sat down by the water." He didn't say anything to that. But there was a quality to his silence that felt less like absence and more like space. Room. The kind of quiet that allows something to be said that might not otherwise make it out. "I run a company," she said. "It's big. Big enough that it's basically its own ecosystem at this point. And I came here because I needed to remember what it feels like to just..." She paused. She didn't finish the sentence because she wasn't entirely sure how. "To just what?" he asked. "To be somewhere," she said finally. "Without it mattering." He nodded slowly. Not in the way people nod when they're being polite. In the way people nod when they've heard something true. "I know that feeling," he said quietly. "Do you?" She hadn't meant it as a challenge. Or maybe she had, a small one. Because she was beginning to suspect that this man had an answer for everything, and she wasn't sure how she felt about that. "Yeah," he said. "I know it from the other side. I used to feel like I was never doing enough. Always one project behind, one promotion away, one credential short." And then, he stopped, looked at Eli, who had apparently finished Phase 1 of the shark dock and was presenting it to an invisible committee. And then life changed, and suddenly all that running stopped. And I realized I hadn't been anywhere in years. I'd just been moving. Victoria looked at her coffee. It was cold now. She drank it anyway. "There's a difference," she said. "Huge difference," he agreed. They talked for 2 hours. She would think about that, later sitting alone in her room, with the window cracked and the sound of the lake coming in on the night air, and she would try to identify the moment when a 3-second mistake became a 2-hour conversation. And she couldn't find it. It had happened without a seam. They'd from her apology to Eli's engineering project, to Daniel explaining, without ceremony or self-pity, that he was there because a buddy from his old job had offered him a few days at the resort as a gift. Said, "I looked like a man who needed to remember what a tree was, and he'd taken Eli and driven down from Fort Collins the night before." He told her about Eli's mom, not with grief exactly, but with the particular careful quietness of someone who has learned to carry something enormous and has gotten good enough at it that it doesn't show in how they walk. His wife Rachel had died 3 years ago. A fast, terrible, completely unfair aneurysm that had arrived on a Wednesday afternoon and left him standing in a hospital parking garage at 11 at night trying to figure out how to call his mother-in-law. "I'm so sorry," Victoria said. "Thank you," he said. And he meant it, and he didn't deflect it or minimize it, which was its own kind of grace. It's "we're okay." Eli barely remembers her. That's the part that gets me sometimes. He's going to grow up, and she'll be pictures and stories. She was so real, you know? She was the loudest logger I've ever met in my life. The kind of laugh that made strangers look around. And he's going to grow up knowing her through photographs. Victoria didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. She just sat with it. "So I take him everywhere I can," Daniel said. "Every place I can afford. Every afternoon I can carve out. Because memories, real ones, the kind you feel, rather than the kind you photograph, those require being present. You can't manufacture them later." He looked at her then. "That's why I was watching him. Not you." He said it without sting. Just matter of fact. Every second I'm watching him is a second he knows someone's paying attention. And that matters more than I used to think it did. Victoria Hartwell, who did not cry in public, who had not cried at all in approximately 8 months by her own quiet accounting, felt the back of her throat tighten in a way she did not appreciate. "You said you run a big company," he said. Are you good at it?" "Yes," she said. The one question she had no uncertainty about. "Do you love it?" She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "I used to," she said. "I used to love it the way you love something you built. Every part of it had my fingerprints on it. Every decision, every hire, every failed prototype, and every product that worked. It was mine, and now?" She looked at the lake. "Now I run meetings where I don't remember half the agenda by the time I get back to my office. Now I sign approvals on decisions that 22-year-old me would have stayed up all night debating. She stopped. "Now I came to a lake resort by myself because my therapist told me, and I quote, that I was operationally present but experientially absent, and I had no idea what that meant until just now." Daniel looked at the lake too. "It means you're showing up without showing up." "Yes, that's exhausting. It is extremely exhausting." Eli appeared suddenly between them, seemingly teleported from the dock's edge. "Dad, I need a rock." "What kind of rock?" "Flat. For the walkway. The shark needs to be able to walk on his dock." "Sharks don't have legs." "Buddy." Eli stared at him with the patience of someone who has already thought of this objection. This one evolved. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. Victoria hadn't even noticed the jacket. Canvas, olive green, and produced, with no visible surprise. A perfectly flat gray stone. "This work?" Eli examined it with professional seriousness. "Yes, this is perfect." He took it and returned to his project. Victoria stared. "Do you just carry rocks?" "He's been in an infrastructure phase for about 3 months, Daniel said. "I've learned to be prepared." She laughed. Actually laughed the kind she hadn't in long enough that it came out slightly surprised. Daniel smiled. It was not the smile of a man trying to charm her. It was the smile of a man who was pleased that she was laughing. As the sun began to pull itself down toward the tree line and the water turned from blue to something golden serious, Eli fell asleep in Daniel's lap with the reliability of a small person who had burned every calorie he had brought to the day. Daniel sat still and kept talking, his voice lower now, one hand resting on his son's back. "You ever feel like..." He started, then paused, like he was checking the sentence before he sent it. "Like you built something everyone wants to be part of. But you forgot to build a life you actually want to live inside of?" She heard it land. She felt it land, not in her chest lower, somewhere more honest. In the place where questions live that you've been successfully avoiding for long enough that they've started leaving notes. "Where did that come from?" she asked. "From watching a lot of people," he said. "My old job, engineering tech, manufacturing environments, big operations floors. You'd be surprised how many people in positions of power are running the same way you are. Different price tags on the exhaustion, Same expression at the end of the shift. You worked in manufacturing? For 11 years. After Rachel died, I moved to something with more flexible hours. Less money. A lot less money. He said it without complaint or performance. Just information. But Eli needed someone actually home. Not just technically home. Home so, she echoed. You make choices, he said. Sometimes the choice that looks like sacrifice is the one that keeps you human. She went back to her room that evening, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and she did not open her laptop. She thought about what he'd said. You built something everyone wants to enter, but forgot to build a life you actually want to live, and she turned it over and over the way you turn a stone over in a river. Looking at all its sides, checking what was underneath. She thought about the way he'd looked at Eli, the flat stone in his pocket. The way he'd said Rachel, not like a wound and not like a scar, but like a person he was still actively keeping real. She thought about her own apartment in Denver, 3,000 square feet. Custom everything. A kitchen she used to heat up leftovers from the restaurant delivery she ordered because cooking felt like an inefficiency she couldn't justify. A guest room no one had ever slept in. A balcony with a view of the city she sometimes stood on at midnight and felt, instead of the triumph she expected, a curious hollow feeling. Like applause in an empty theater. She thought about Marcus. About the way he'd called her impressive, the way people call an expensive watch impressive admiringly. At a slight distance, without any real interest in what was inside. She thought about her last board meeting, where she'd sat at the head of a table, with 11 people whose salary she paid. In a building she'd built, running a company she'd created out of nothing. And felt for one terrible lucid instant, like a stranger who had wandered in and was now too embarrassed to admit she didn't belong. She thought about a man who carried flat rocks in his jacket pocket because his son was going through an infrastructure phase. She picked up her phone, opened her email, read the first subject line urgent. Q4 distribution optimization, memo action required. Looked at it, put the phone face down on the nightstand, lay back on the bed, looked at the ceiling. For the first time in a long time, she did not move until she was actually ready to. She saw him at breakfast the next morning. He was at the small round table near the window, Eli across from him. Both of them working through plates of eggs with the focused energy of people who had plans for the day. She hesitated at the entrance to the cafe, that unfamiliar hesitation she didn't like. The half-second of uncertainty that she normally bulldozed through by sheer momentum. He looked up, saw her, gave a small nod, not effusive, not performative, just I see you. She crossed the room and stood at the edge of their table. Mind up a chair, he said. Eli looked up. He had egg on his chin and showed no concern about this. Are you the lady from the dock? I am, Victoria said. Dad said you were interesting. She looked at Daniel. He looked back at her without apology. He did? He said you were like one of those icebergs. More under the water than on top. She pulled out the chair and sat down. Your dad's very perceptive. He's a lot of things, Eli said wisely. And went back to his eggs. Daniel poured her coffee from the small carafe on the table, without being asked. She watched him do it, and thought without exactly choosing to, when was the last time someone did something for me without wanting something back? She wrapped both hands around the cup. Let the warmth come through. What's the plan today? She asked. Eli wants to test whether the shark dock survived the night, Daniel said. Structural integrity inspection. Critical, Eli confirmed. After that, probably the hiking trail on the east side. They've got a lookout about a mile up. You're not working? You're just here, he said. Completely just here. He looked at her steadily. You could try it. She started to say she didn't know how. She stopped. She thought about her therapist, about experientially absent, about 3,000 square feet and a guest room and a midnight balcony. Maybe, she said. That's better than no, he said. And Eli looked up very briefly and he said, with the certainty of a 5-year-old engineer, you should come see if the shark dock is still standing. It's important. Victoria looked at the boy, at the man, at the coffee in her hands. "All right," she said. "Show me." She had no idea. Walking down to that dock with a single dad and a 5-year-old on a September morning, that she was about to discover something that would drain not just her company, but the way she understood what a company is for. And she had no idea that the man walking beside her had a secret that would stop her cold before the week was out. The shark dock had survived the night. Eli announced this with the satisfaction of a structural engineer whose calculations had proven correct under field conditions. Crouching down at the dock's edge and running his small fingers along the arrangement of sticks and stones with the focused attention of someone conducting a formal inspection. "No damage," he reported gravely. "The shark is safe." "That's a relief," Victoria said. And she meant it in a way she didn't entirely expect. Daniel was standing just behind his son, hands in the front pockets of his jeans, watching Eli with that same particular quality of attention she'd noticed the afternoon before. That quality that wasn't passive, it was active, engaged. A choice made consciously and repeatedly. She'd been around a lot of fathers in her professional life. Board members who talked about their kids like assets. Executives who carried pictures in their wallets they hadn't updated since the first grade. This was different. This was a man whose primary occupation, despite everything else on his plate, was paying attention to his child. She filed that away. She was always filing things away. It was the part of her brain that never actually went on vacation, regardless of where her body was. "Eli," Daniel said, "why don't you go ask Mrs. Patterson at the front desk if she's got any rope? Tell her it's for an engineering project." Eli stood, completely serious. "She'll want to know what kind of engineering." "Marine engineering." "Okay." He marched off with the purpose of someone who had a meeting to get to. Victoria watched him go, then looked at Daniel. "You just sent a 5-year-old to negotiate materials acquisition. He's better at it than I am. Mrs. Patterson has a soft spot for him." Daniel sat down on the edge of the dock. She gave him 3 cookies yesterday and pretended it was 2. Victoria sat beside him. The morning was cooler than the afternoon had been that particular September morning, cool that sits honest and clean in the air before the day burns it off. She'd worn a light jacket today, no blazer, and she'd left her phone in the room again, which was now becoming less of a decision and more of a habit she was cautiously allowing. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You're going to regardless," he said, without any judgment. She acknowledged that with a slight nod. "The engineering job. Why'd you actually leave? You said flexible hours." But she stopped, chose the honest version. "That doesn't sound like the whole story." He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the lake. The water was still in the morning. The far shore reflected back in it with a clarity that seemed almost presumptuous. "The whole story," he said finally, "is that Rachel got sick 6 months before she died. We didn't know what it was at first. Headaches, fatigue, the kind of thing that could be anything. And I was working 60, 70 hours a week on a project that my supervisor described as career-defining." He paused. "I missed 2 of her first doctor's appointments. The third one was where they found the aneurysm." Victoria didn't move. "She told me not to feel guilty," he said. She was constitutionally opposed to unnecessary guilt. She said it was a waste of metabolic energy. He almost smiled. She was also right. But knowing something and living it are different zip codes. "What did you do?" "I went to the next appointment. And everyone after that. My supervisor called it a performance issue. I called it a priority realignment." He glanced at her. "We disagreed on the terminology. You lost the job? Technically, I resigned before they could fire me. There's a difference. Not a financial one." "No," he agreed. "Not a financial one." She sat with that for a moment. The dock creaked faintly beneath them. Somewhere across the water, a bird made a sound that probably had a name she didn't know. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be, I made the right call." He said it without hesitation. Without the performance of certainty, just actual certainty. The kind that comes from having sat with a decision long enough that it stops needing defense. I was there for the last 4 months of her life. I was there. Every morning, every bad day, every decent day. Every night she couldn't sleep. I have that. Nobody can take that from me. And Eli was 18 months old, and she could see that he was going to grow up, knowing what it looked like when someone showed up. Victoria looked at her hands. She was pressing them together in her lap, without realizing it. You make everything sound very certain, she said carefully. It's not, he said. It just sounds that way, because I've had 3 years to find the solid parts. He looked at her directly. How long have you been running? She blinked. I'm not Victoria. He said her name the same way he'd said it the first time, simple. Level, without decoration. You drove to a lake resort alone. Told me you feel empty, admitted your laptop is 20 feet away, and winning the psychological battle. And you said your therapist called you experientiously absent. He tilted his head slightly. How long? She opened her mouth, closed it. The honest answer was sitting right at the surface, which was uncomfortable because she wasn't used to honest answers being that accessible. Since the company went public, she said. 4 years ago. He nodded once. That's a long run. It's a big company, I know, he said. She looked at him. What do you mean, you know? He paused. Something moved across his face, brief, contained. The micro-expression of a person deciding how much of a thing to say. I mean, running something big takes everything you've got. I watched my old director do it. Smart man. Gave the company 15 years of his best thinking and woke up one day and his kids were strangers and his wife had a whole life he'd missed and he was standing in the middle of it, all trying to figure out how he was supposed to. Feel about a corner office. She heard the pivot. Let it stand. Didn't push past it. But she noticed. She always noticed. Eli came running back across the dock. Triumphant, trailing approximately 4 feet of thin rope behind him. She had marine rope, he announced. She said it was for boats, but it works the same. Perfect, Daniel said. She also gave me a cookie. Just one this time? Eli hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. Yes. Daniel looked at him. Fine. 2. But one was small. Victoria laughed before she could stop it, that same surprised laugh from the afternoon before. The one that came out, ahead of the version she would have shaped for public consumption. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Eli looked at her with the interest expression of a person who has discovered they have an audience. I can also juggle, he offered. Daniel said. I can't actually juggle, Eli clarified. But I'm working on it. He's very committed to the aspiration, Daniel told Victoria. That's the first step, she said, and Eli nodded gravely, as if she had confirmed something he'd been arguing internally for some time. They spent the morning like that, Eli working on his infrastructure project with the rope and the rocks and an increasingly complex architectural vision. Victoria and Daniel talking in the way that people sometimes do when they're outside of their regular context. When all the usual armor has been checked at the door, and what's left is just 2 people at a lake with nothing they have to accomplish. She told him about her mother, who had been a seamstress and had worked double shifts, and had Victoria break out from age 7, that the only thing no one could ever take from you was what you put in your own head. She told him about the first time she'd pitched her company to investors. Standing in a conference room in Chicago, in a suit she'd bought on credit. Watching 3 men in expensive ties decide in real time whether she was worth their attention. She told him she'd walked out of that room with a check and walked directly to a bathroom stall, and sat on the floor for 7 minutes because her knees had stopped cooperating. He laughed at that, the real laugh. And then he said, What'd you do after the 7 minutes? Called my mother, she said. She said, You didn't need them to believe in you. You needed their money. I like your mother, Daniel said. She would have liked you, Victoria said, and then felt the past tense land somewhere soft. Because her mother had been gone for 2 years and she still hadn't figured out the right way to live in a world where she couldn't call her. Daniel looked at her. I'm sorry, don't be, she said, hearing the echo of his own words back to her. She was 81 and she was happy, and she went in her sleep. It was the kind of ending she'd earned. She paused. I think about how much she would have had opinions about my last 4 years. She was not a woman who withheld opinions. What do you think she'd say? Victoria considered it genuinely. She'd say I got so busy building the store that I forgot to come inside out of the rain. He was quiet for a moment. That's pretty good. She was very good with metaphors. You're not bad yourself. She looked at him sideways. He was looking at the lake. There was a quality to his profile, the steadiness of it. The lack of performance that she kept coming back to. Kept measuring against the people she was normally surrounded by. Kept finding different in ways she was still cataloging. He wasn't trying to be anything. That was the thing. He wasn't managing her perception of him, wasn't positioning himself, wasn't building toward anything. He was just here. Completely, inconveniently, almost aggressively just here. It was, she realized with a start, that she kept to herself. One of the most intimate things anyone had done in her presence in years. Not because of what he said or did, because of what he wasn't doing. He wasn't leaving himself, and without even trying. That made her want to stop leaving herself too. Then Eli fell in. Not dramatically, not a dangerous fall, not the kind that stops hearts. Just the sudden, inevitable consequence of 5-year-old engineering confidence, meeting the basic laws of physics at the dock's edge. 1 second he was leaning forward to place a stone. The next he was in the water up to his chest, completely surprised. The orange life jacket, doing exactly what it was designed to do, and bobbing him right back to the surface with a gasp that converted immediately to outrage. Daniel was on his feet in the same instant. One hand gripping the dock post, the other extended toward Eli. His voice absolutely calm. I've got you. Grab my hand. I'm wet, I see that. Grab my hand, the shark dock. We'll fix the dock. Hand. Eli grabbed his hand, with the grip of a person who has recently decided that dry land is underrated. Daniel pulled him up in one smooth motion, and Eli stood dripping on the dock, looking at the water with the expression of someone who has been personally betrayed by a body of water they had been building for. The rocks fell in, Eli said, devastated. We'll get more rocks. The rope is wet. Rope dries, I'm wet, so we established. Daniel had already crouched down, unclipping the life jacket with practiced efficiency, running a quick check hands, face, the automatic parental inventory of a person who has learned exactly what to verify. You okay? Nothing hurt? My feelings, Eli said, with great dignity. Victoria, who had stood the moment Eli went in, and had taken exactly 2 steps before Daniel had it completely handled, felt something happen in her chest that she didn't have an immediate clinical term for. She watched Daniel check his son, watched Eli's outrage transform in real time from genuine distress into the theatrical outrage of a child who is fine and knows it. And she thought with a clarity that cut through everything else she'd been thinking. All morning, this man does everything without an audience. No one was watching him be a good father. There was no performance in it. There was no moment where he looked up to see if anyone noticed. He'd checked Eli's hands and face and heart rate before he'd even straightened up. Before he'd said a single thing, before he'd done anything, except be present for the specific person who needed him. She sat back down. Her hands were shaking slightly. Which was interesting, because nothing had actually happened. Except something had. She just wasn't ready to name it yet. They took Eli inside to dry off and change, and while Daniel sat on the edge of the resort's small changing room bench, helping Eli pull on dry socks, Eli narrating the injustice of the whole incident in full detail, including what he felt the water owed him, Victoria stood in the hallway just outside the open door and thought about the flat stone in his jacket pocket. About a man who anticipated what his child would need before the need was spoken. About a company she ran where her managers couldn't tell her the names of the employees in their own departments without consulting a spreadsheet. She thought about her distribution floor in Colorado Springs, the one she'd toured exactly once. 14 months ago, for a press photo she'd needed for the annual report. She thought about the people she'd shaken hands with and photographed alongside, and whose actual working conditions, actual daily experience, Actual professional lives she could not have described with any accuracy. She thought about what Daniel had said. You built something everyone wants to enter, but forgot to build a life you actually want to live. And standing in a hallway in a quiet lake resort while a 5-year-old in dry socks debriefed his father on the structural failure that had led to his unexpected swim, Victoria Hartwell had a thought that frightened her with its clarity. What if that's not just true of my personal life? What if it's also true of my company? That thought followed her through lunch, which they ate at the small outdoor table on the resort's back patio, and through the afternoon, when Eli convinced both of them to participate in what he described as a rock evaluation mission along the lake shore, which involved picking up rocks and submitting them for Eli's assessment on criteria that were not fully disclosed but apparently included weight, shape, color, and what he called the vibe. Victoria submitted 14 rocks. 3 were approved. She found this more satisfying than she expected. Daniel watched her crouch down to find a flat one beside a clump of reeds. Watched her hold it up to Eli with the particular expression of someone presenting evidence. Watched Eli take it with both hands and weigh it seriously. And Daniel smiled at his coffee in a way that Victoria saw from the corner of her eye but didn't comment on. She wasn't ready to comment on it. She was still thinking about the distribution floor. That evening, after Eli had been put to bed in the room, they shared a fact that Daniel mentioned without self-consciousness. Because there was no universe in which Daniel performed poverty or apologized for the shape of his budget, Victoria sat alone at the small table near the resort's fire pit and did the thing she had been avoiding for 2 days. She opened her laptop, not to check email, not to read the Q4 memo. She opened it, and she typed a name into her company's internal HR system, and she sat very still while the results loaded. She looked at the staffing data for the Colorado Springs Distribution Center. Turnover rate, 41% in the last 18 months. Average tenure, 14 months. Incident reports, equipment issues. Procedural complaints, scheduling grievances. She scrolled. She scrolled for longer than she expected to. She closed the laptop. She sat in the dark by the fire pit, and she thought about those numbers with the specific discomfort of a person who has been avoiding a mirror and has finally stood in front of one. 41%. She hadn't known. She'd signed the reports, initialed the summaries, moved on to the next agenda item. She'd trusted her operations VP, who trusted his directors, who trusted their managers, who apparently trusted no one because the structure of accountability had gotten so diluted between her desk and the actual floor that something important had stopped directions. People were leaving. People were leaving at nearly double the industry average. And she hadn't known, and she called herself a CEO who understood people. And you okay? She looked up. Daniel was standing a few feet away, hands in his jacket pockets, having apparently come back out after getting Eli settled. He had the particular quietness of a person who moves without announcing himself, not stealthy, just unhurried. No, she said, and then blinked. Because that was the first time she'd said that to anyone in longer than she could immediately calculate. He sat down across from her. He didn't ask her to explain. He just sat there, which was the right thing to do. And she had already noticed that he had an unusual gift for knowing what the right thing was. I looked at my company's staffing numbers just now, she said. One of my distribution centers. The turnover is, she stopped. It's bad, it's really bad. And I didn't know. He was quiet. I have a full leadership team, she said. Operations VP. Regional directors, floor managers. Huckcher, I have an entire architecture of people whose job it is to these things and tell me. And none of them. She stopped again, rubbed the back of her neck. Or they did tell me, and it was in a report I initialed without reading the specific numbers. Which is worse? Is it? Yes. That's worse, because it means the system worked exactly as designed, and I'm what failed. He let that sit for a moment. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. She paused. That's the second most honest thing I've said out loud in 2 days. What was the first? When I told you I didn't know how to just be somewhere. He nodded. The fire crackled. A log shifted. Can I tell you something, he said. Obviously. I worked in a facility like the one you're describing. Not yours, a different one. Automotive parts. Big operation. Good company on paper. Quarterly numbers that looked clean from the outside. He paused. The floor was a different story. People working double shifts because hiring had frozen. Equipment that needed servicing that wasn't getting serviced because the maintenance budget had been cut. Supervisors who'd stopped asking questions because the last guy who asked questions got quietly moved to a worse shift. She was very still. I was one of the people who knew what was wrong, he said. I knew exactly what needed to happen. I'd solved half the problems informally, on my own time, because I couldn't stand Hochtint watching things not work when I could see how to fix them. But I was an E3 technician. Nobody asked me. The people who could have asked me had never been on the floor long enough to know I existed. She heard what he wasn't saying as clearly as what he was. How long did you work there? She voice was quieter now. 7 years, he said. 7 years of watching the same 3 problems cycle through because no one in a position to fix them had spent enough time where the problems actually lived. She looked at the fire. What happened to the facility? It's still running, he said. Probably still has the same 3 problems. I don't know. I moved on. She looked at him. Why are you telling me this? He met her eyes. Because you're not the kind of person who needs someone to solve things for her. You need someone to say the thing you already know out loud. She held his gaze for a long moment. And what do I already know? She said. That the distance between your office and your floor is too far, he said. And that the people who keep your company alive don't know if you know they exist. The fire popped. Somewhere across the dark water, a bird called once. Twice went quiet. Victoria Hartwell, who had built a billion-dollar company, and who had sat across from senators and investors and competitors, and never once felt outmaneuvered. Felt something crack open in her chest with a clean, specific, unavoidable sound, not breaking, opening. She picked up her coffee cup. Empty. She'd forgotten she'd finished it. How do you do that? She asked. Do what? Say exactly the thing. She set the cup down. Without making it feel like an attack. He thought about it for a second. Because I don't think you're wrong, he said. I think you got too far from the ground and forgot what it felt like to stand on it. That's not a character flaw. That's what distance does. He paused. The question is whether you want to close it. She looked at him. She was quiet for a long moment, not the kind of quiet that precedes deflection, but the kind that precedes something true. I drove 3 hours to a lake resort to remember how to be a human being, she said. And I ended up sitting next to someone who's better at it than anyone I've met in 4 years. He looked at the fire. Something crossed his face, not pride, not pleasure in the compliment. Something quieter than that. Something that looked almost like recognition. I'm not better at it, he said. I just had things taken away that forced me to pay attention to what actually mattered. He paused. Loss is an ugly teacher, but it's thorough. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. There was only the fire, and the dark and the water somewhere behind them reflecting nothing, because there was no moon yet. And 2 people sitting with the specific weight of real conversation, the kind that doesn't happen in conference rooms, or across desks, or in the language of agendas and action items. The kind that happens when all of that falls away, and what's left is just the truth of 2 lives sitting next to each other in the dark. I'm going back tomorrow, Victoria said finally. I need to. She stopped. Restarted. I need to go see the floor. He looked at her. Which floor? Colorado Springs, the distribution center. She sat straighter. I need to go look at it, the way you just described, not from my office. Not through a report. I need to go stand on the actual ground. He nodded slowly. Good. It's going to be uncomfortable. Probably. I might find out things I don't want to know. Almost certainly. She looked at him. You're not very comforting. You know that? You didn't ask for comfort, he said. You asked for honesty. She had not technically. asked for either. But he was right about which one she'd needed. She stood, picked up her empty cup. She looked at him for a moment, this specific man, with his canvas jacket and his flat rock collection, and his ability to say true things without sharpening them into weapons, and she felt, for the second time in this conversation, that specific cracking open sensation. That sense of something that had been sealed for too long getting air. "Daniel," she said. "Yeah, thank you." She paused. Not for the conversation specifically. She searched for the word. For the way you treat people. Like they're worth your full attention. He looked up at her. And, for the first time since she'd walked up to him on the dock and said something presumptuous and been quietly corrected for it, she saw something in his face that wasn't just steadiness or patience or warmth. She saw something more specific, something that moved. "Get some sleep," he said quietly. "You've got a company to fix." She walked back inside. She did not open her laptop. She lay on top of the covers with all the lights off and stared at the ceiling and thought about 41% and about a man who carried rocks in his jacket pocket and about the 7 words that had started all of this. "You were standing between me and the one person I never want to lose sight of." She had thought, in that first moment, that it was a deflection. She understood now that it was a lesson. She just didn't know yet how deep the lesson went, or what she was about to find when she stood on the ground of her own company and looked at it the way Daniel had looked at her, without the distance, without the filter, without the carefully maintained altitude that kept everything looking clean and numerical and safe. She didn't know yet that when she got to that floor, she was going to find something that would pull the breath straight out of her. She didn't know yet that the man she'd met beside a lake, who talked about loss and presence and the difference between moving and being somewhere, that man was about to walk back into her life in a way she had not remotely anticipated. And she didn't know yet that the next time she saw him, he wouldn't be sitting on a dock watching his son build a shelter for a traveling shark. He would be in a hard hat at 11 o'clock at night on the floor of her Colorado Springs distribution center, fixing a problem that 3 of her managers had filed reports about and none of them had solved. And the world was about to get considerably more complicated for both of them. She left Cedarwood Lake at 7 in the morning. She didn't say goodbye to Daniel. She'd told herself the night before that she'd find him at breakfast, that she'd say something appropriate and measured and grateful without being strange about it. But when she came downstairs at 6:50 with her bag over her shoulder, the cafe was empty except for Mrs. Patterson restocking the pastry case, and the table by the window where Daniel and Eli had eaten eggs 2 mornings in a row was clean and unoccupied, and somehow that felt like the right ending. Some things didn't need ceremony. Some things you just carried out with you and let the carrying be the conclusion. She drove back to Denver with the windows down for the first 40 miles, which she never did because highway wind destroyed her hair and she always had somewhere to be that required her hair to be intact. This morning she had nowhere to be except back to her own life, and her hair could do whatever it wanted. She was in her office by 10:15. Her assistant, Priya, met her at the elevator with a tablet and the expressions of a person who had been managing a small contained emergency for 2 days and was very professionally not mentioning it. "Welcome back. You have the Meridian call at 11. The board pre-read went out this morning, and Marcus Holt called twice yesterday." "Marcus can wait," Victoria said. Walking past her toward her desk, Priya fell into step beside her. He said it was about the Q4 partnership proposal. "Marcus calls everything urgent. It's a personality trait. What else? Greg Sauer from operations wants 15 minutes today. He says it's about the Colorado Springs report." Victoria stopped walking. Priya stopped beside her. "What about it?" He didn't specify. He just said it was time sensitive. "Fine." After the Meridian call, she set her bag down and turned to face Priya fully, which was something she didn't always do. Usually she was already looking at the next thing, for the current thing was finished. Pull the last 6 months of incident reports from Colorado Springs. Full reports, not the summary versions. And the turnover data? Full breakdown by department and shift. Priya's expression shifted not obviously. Just a small recalibration. I can have those by noon. Thank you. Victoria sat down. Then Priya. Yes? How long have you worked for me? Priya blinked. 4 years in January. Do you like it? The blink again. More pronounced this time. Ah yes. It's a demanding position, but Priya. She met her assistant's eyes directly. Not the professional answer, the actual one. A pause. The particular pause of someone deciding whether a question is a trap or an invitation. Some days are harder than others, Priya said carefully. But I believe in what the company is trying to do. And she stopped. I'm what? You're someone I learn from, Priya said. Even when the learning is uncomfortable. Victoria held her gaze for a moment. Thank you for that. And for managing whatever the last 2 days produced. She paused. Schedule time with me next week. Not a work agenda. I want to know how things actually function from where you sit. Priya stared at her for just a half second too long. Then she nodded. I'll find the time. Good. She left. Victoria turned to her window and looked out at Denver and thought about a lake and a man who knew what a flat rock was worth and a turnover rate of 41%. And she made a decision she'd been building toward since the fire pit and didn't announce it to anyone because it wasn't ready yet to be a thing, she said out loud. The Meridian call lasted 40 minutes. She was sharp in it. Precise. Said exactly what needed saying and not one word past it. Greg Sauer knocked on her open door at 12:40 with the body language of a man approaching something he suspected might detonate. Greg was 46, operations VP for 4 years, good at his job in the way that people are good at their jobs, when their job is primarily about managing upward. He had a gift for translating bad news into acceptable news, which Victoria had once considered an asset and was now reconsidering. You wanted to talk about Colorado Springs, she said before he sat down. Right. He settled into the chair across from her desk. Set a thin folder on the desk between them. I wanted to brief you before you saw the Q3 numbers. The turnover figures are 41%, she said. He stopped. You've seen them. I looked last night. He nodded carefully. It's a challenging market for that type of role. The labor pool in that corridor has been. Greg, she picked up the folder. Didn't open it. Is this a market problem or a management problem? The careful nod again. But slower. It's complex. The regional director has been dealing with some structural issues around scheduling. And there've been some equipment reliability concerns that have affected morale. Who's the floor supervisor on the overnight shift? A pause. I'd have to check. She looked at him. Yeah, I'd have to check. There've been some personnel changes at that level in the last Greg. She set the folder back down. I'm going to Colorado Springs on Thursday. I'm going to walk the floor on the overnight shift. I want you to set that up without announcing to anyone that I'm coming. The careful nod stopped being careful. Victoria, I'm not sure that's the best approach. If we give the regional team advance notice, they can prepare a proper. I don't want prepared, she said it quietly. Which was more effective than loudly. She'd learned that before her company had its first million in revenue. I want real. Set it up. Greg left looking like a man who had gone in for a routine appointment and come out with unexpected homework. Priya brought the reports at 1:15. Victoria read every page. She read for 3 hours and 40 minutes, and she did not check her phone, and she did not take any of the 4 calls that came in from people who were, by Priya's quiet assessment, patient but present. By the time she finished, the light coming through her window had changed from afternoon to early evening, and she had 3 pages of handwritten notes and a specific, sober, clear-eyed understanding of exactly how much she hadn't known about the people who kept her company operational. Equipment maintenance delays, averaging 11 days past the required service window. 3 formal grievances from overnight crew members in the last 8 months. All logged, none escalated past the second tier. A senior technician employee ID, 4,471. Name redacted in the summary version she'd been receiving, who had filed the same process improvement report 4 times in 14 months and received the same form letter response each time. 12 employees in the last 6 months who had cited management communication as their reason for leaving on exit surveys. 12. In one facility. She turned to the last page of her handwritten notes and wrote one line at the bottom. The people who keep this alive don't know if you know they exist. She looked at it, heard it in his voice, realized she'd written it in his words without intending to. She left the office at 7. She did not call Marcus. She called her mother's old number by accident. On the drive home, a mistake she still made occasionally. 14 months after the number had been disconnected. Because muscle memory is longer than grief. She held the phone against her ear for 3 seconds of silence, and then put it down and drove the rest of the way home, without music. Thursday arrived the way important days sometimes do ordinary on the surface. Unobtrusive, giving no external indication that something was about to change. She flew to Colorado Springs at 4 in the afternoon, which put her there by 5:30. She checked into a hotel 6 miles from the distribution center under her company card. Ate dinner at the hotel restaurant alone, and reviewed everything she knew about overnight operations in a facility of that size. She'd built the thing. She knew the theory. What she was about to find out was how far the practice had drifted from it. At 10:15 p.m., she got into a company car that Greg had arranged and drove herself to the Colorado Springs facility. It was a big building. She knew the square footage, she'd approved it. She knew the capacity numbers and the throughput targets and the operational KPIs. What she hadn't known, standing outside it at 10:20 at night, was the sound of it, the low, continuous mechanical hum of a large operation that doesn't stop just because the sun goes down. The particular aliveness of a building full of people doing work that most of the world benefits from without thinking about. She had her visitor badge. The overnight floor manager, a man named Terrence, who had been told only that a corporate representative was doing a compliance review, met her at the side entrance. He was 38, stocky, looked tired in the way that overnight shift managers look tired as a baseline. He shook her hand without recognizing her, which was what she'd asked for. "Quiet night," Terrence said, leading her onto the floor. "We've had some conveyor issues on line 4, but the team's managing. How long have you had conveyor issues on line 4? He glanced at her sideways. "On and off for about 6 weeks. Maintenance has been out twice. Keeps recurring." "What's the recurring issue?" "Tension calibration on the belt mechanism. Third one from the west wall. Our tech keeps adjusting it manually, but it needs a component replacement. And the parts order's been pending." For he checked something on the clipboard he was carrying. 22 days. 22 days. She wrote it on the notepad she'd brought. "Okay, walk me through the floor," he did. She listened more than she spoke. Which was not her natural mode, but which produced better information. She watched people work. She watched the rhythm of the overnight crew, the particular focused efficiency of people who had learned to do their jobs well, in spite of the conditions, rather than because of them. She watched a woman at the sorting station develop a workaround for a scanner that was intermittently failing. A smooth automatic adjustment that spoke to long practice with a persistent problem. She stopped beside the sorting station. "How long has that scanner been doing that?" The woman looked up, early 30s. Quick eyes, the expression of someone who has been working long enough to be slightly surprised when anyone from outside pays attention. "About 3 months, she said, her tone professionally neutral. "Has it been reported?" 3 times, the woman said. Then, as if catching herself, "that I know of." Victoria wrote it down. "Thank you." She moved on. Behind her, she heard Terrence make a small sound, not quite a word. Just an exhalation that translated to something like "huh." She spent 90 minutes on the floor. She covered line 2 through line 5. She talked to 7 people, actually talked, stood still and asked questions and listened to the answers without checking anything or looking past them. She learned the name of the scanner woman, who was called Denise, and had been with the company for 3 years, and had applied for a lead position 8 months ago and hadn't heard back. She learned that the vending machines in the break room had been broken for 6 weeks and the replacement was in process. She learned that the most recent safety briefing had been conducted via a recorded video because the regional director had canceled the in-person session twice. Each of these things was its own small alarm. Together they were a pattern. She was at the east end of the floor, near the equipment storage bays. When she heard him, not his voice, not immediately. She heard the sound first, a specific metallic adjustment. A calibrated tension release, the particular sound of someone who knows exactly what a piece of machinery needs, and is giving it precisely that. She turned. He was crouched beside the Line 4 conveyor belt mechanism, the third one from the west wall. Exactly where Terrence had described the recurring tension issue. He had a set of tools beside him, organized with the instinctive neatness of someone who has been working with tools long enough that disorder is physically uncomfortable. He wore a hard hat and the standard floor-issue safety vest over a gray t-shirt. He was adjusting the tension calibration with the focused attention of a man who is solving a problem that has been ignored for too long and intends to solve it correctly. Victoria stopped walking. Terrence, a step ahead, turned back. That's Brooks. He's one of our overnight techs. Works the mechanical maintenance rotation. The floor tilted. Not literally, but her perception of it did, that specific interior vertigo that happens when the world reorganizes itself around, a fact you didn't have before. She stood very still while her brain processed the information on 2 tracks simultaneously. One track was performing the rapid professional assessment. Overnight tech, maintenance rotation, tension calibration. 22-day parts order, 4 unanswered improvement reports. Employee ID 4,471. The other track was simpler and louder and said only, Daniel. Brooks. Terrence called over. We've got a compliance rep here from corporate. Daniel looked up, and he saw her. She watched the moment register across his face. It was a fast sequence recognition, genuine surprise. A fractional second of something that might have been alarm. And then the steadiness, the same steadiness she'd seen on a dock in September, when she'd said something presumptuous, and he'd answered her, honestly. He didn't look away. He didn't perform the encounter. He just looked at her, factually, the way he looked at most things. And waited. Hi, she said. Hi, he said. Terrence looked between them. You two know each other? We've met, Victoria said. And her voice was completely even, which required more effort than she intended. Daniel stood. He had grease on the back of his right hand. He didn't wipe it on his vest, just held the hand slightly away from his side. You're the compliance reviewer. I'm reviewing some operational concerns, she said. Which was true. He looked at her for another half-second. Reading something in her face, she wasn't sure she was showing. Then he looked at Terrence. The tension calibration's set. It'll hold until the replacement part comes in. But Terrence, he held up 3 fingers. 3 days maximum. After that, it'll need adjustment again. I'll put it in the log, Terrence said. It's in 4 previous logs, Daniel said. Flat and precise. No heat in it. What it needs is a parts escalation. Terrence absorbed that. Wrote something on his clipboard. Victoria looked at Daniel. Can I ask you some questions? He met her eyes. Yes. Terrence started to say something. She stopped him with a look not harsh, just definitive. I'll find you in a few minutes, Terrence. Thank you. Terrence took his clipboard and his compliance and went. They stood beside the Line 4 conveyor in the hum and light of an overnight operation. And for a moment neither of them said anything. The machinery ran. People moved at their stations 20 yards away. The building breathed around them. How long, she said. 7 months. At this facility, yes. Before that, Fort Collins warehouse. Before that, a manufacturing plant in Pueblo. He paused. I've been in logistics and maintenance for about 4 years. Since I left the engineering tech position. She nodded slowly. The 4 improvement reports. Something crossed his face brief. quickly contained. You read those. I read everything in the file last night. She paused. I'm sorry it took this long. He looked at her steadily. Are you here because of the file? Or because of both, she said. But the file would have brought me here eventually regardless. She held his gaze. I just didn't know yet that you were in it. He looked down at the tool in his hand. Set it carefully on the equipment tray. Victoria. Yeah. This is he stopped. Started again. I don't want this to be a thing where someone gets special treatment because of a conversation at a lake. It's not, she said. The conversation at the lake is why I'm standing on this floor at 11 o'clock at night instead of reading a summary report in my office. The file is why I know there are 4 unanswered improvement memos. A 22-day parts delay, a scanner on line 2 that's been broken for 3 months, and 12 exit surveys in 6 months that all cite the same management issue. He was quiet. You're not getting special treatment, she said. You're getting the same thing everyone on this floor deserves, which is someone who actually came to look. He held her gaze for a long moment. Okay, he said, okay. She looked at the conveyor. Tell me about the tension calibration. The real version, not the log version, he told her. He was good at it clear. Specific, no extra words, the kind of explanation that assumes the listener is intelligent, and doesn't over-explain but also doesn't leave gaps. He told her about the belt mechanism, and why the manual adjustment was a recurring solution to a structural problem, and what the correct fix looked like and how much it would cost, which was less than 2 days of the productivity loss from the intermittent failures. He told her about the scanner on line 2 and the workaround Denise had developed, and why the workaround worked but was slower. He told her about the safety briefing, and why the recorded video version had produced 3 times as many procedural incidents in the 1 month as the previous in-person version had. He had numbers. He had documentation. He had apparently been compiling this information with the methodical patience of a man who believed that eventually someone with authority would show up and ask the right questions. She was writing fast. You've been tracking all of this. Someone has to. She looked up from the notepad. Why didn't you go above Terrence? I did, he said. 6 months ago. Submitted a full operational assessment to the regional director's office. He paused. Got a form response in about 2 weeks telling me my feedback had been noted and would be incorporated into the Q2 review cycle. She knew what the Q2 review cycle had produced. She'd signed the summary. It hadn't incorporated anything except the numbers that were already acceptable. I'm sorry, she said again. Stop apologizing, he said. And it wasn't unkind. Do something about it. She looked at him. Is that what you told yourself? When you filed the 4th report. When I filed the 4th report, he said. I told myself I was probably wasting my time. But I also told myself that the people on this floor had been here longer than me and would be here after me. And if there was even a 10% chance someone would read it and fix one thing, that was worth an hour of my night. She looked at him for a long moment. At the grease on the back of his hand. At the hard hat he'd pushed back slightly on his head. The way people do when they're having a real conversation, and the formality of the equipment starts to feel like a costume. You're the smartest person on this floor, she said. He shook his head. I'm the most documented. That's different. Denise is smart too, she said. And whoever wrote the scheduling grievance in March. And the person who filed the first safety report on the Line 3 pulley system 9 months ago. He paused. Looked at her with a new quality of attention. You read the individual reports. Not just the summary. I told you. Everything in the file. Something shifted in his expression. Small but real. The specific expression of a person who has been trying to be heard for a long time and is now recalibrating to the reality that someone actually listened. What are you going to do? He asked. Same question he'd asked at the fire pit. Different stakes. Tonight, talk to Terrence about the parts escalation and get that belt component ordered before I leave this building. She held his eyes. This week, I'm scheduling direct conversations with every floor lead at this facility. Not through the regional director's office. Direct. She paused. After that, I don't know yet. But I'm starting here. With the people who actually know what's wrong and have been trying to say so. He looked at her. And what she saw in his face in that moment wasn't the warmth from the dock or the steadiness from the fire pit. It was something she didn't expect. Something that looked like the expression of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just, unexpectedly, been offered a moment to set it down. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, she said. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. She saw something happen in his face, a fast drop. A sudden shift from the conversation they were having to somewhere else entirely. He answered immediately. Hey, what happened? Slow down, a pause. When? Another pause, and his face changed again, not panic, but the controlled rapid reorganization of someone receiving information that changes everything about the next several hours. Is she okay? Okay, don't move, I'm coming. He hung up. He looked at Victoria, Mrs. Delgado, Eli's overnight caregiver. She fell. They've taken her to St. Francis. Eli is at home. He's been alone for. He checked his watch. The calculation crossed his face. 40 minutes. He was already moving toward the equipment bay to secure his tools. His hands were fast and certain, the same hands that fixed a belt mechanism and adjusted a tension calibration. Now moving through the specific emergency of a father whose child was alone and frightened. He was reaching for his phone again, dialing, listening. Eli, he said. I know, I'm coming. Are you in the house? Good. Turn on the kitchen light. Stay right there. I'm 10 minutes, okay? A pause. Victoria could hear, faintly, the small voice on the other end, not crying, but close. I know it's dark. Turn on every light in the house. I don't care, I'll be there. 10 minutes, I promise. He hung up. Looked at Terrence, who had materialized from somewhere across the floor. I have to go. Family emergency. My son's caregiver was taken to the hospital and he's alone. Terrence's face went through several things at once: human concern, managerial concern, the uncomfortable collision of both. Brooks, the overnight policy. I know the policy, Daniel said. Eli's 5 years old, and he's been alone for 40 minutes. I'm going. I understand that, but I have to document an unauthorized. Document it, Daniel said. He said it without anger. He said it the way he said most things, with complete certainty about what mattered most, and no particular need for the other person to agree. He picked up his bag. Victoria stepped forward. Terrence. Terrence looked at her. Don't document anything tonight, she said. Handle this as a family emergency-approved absence. If there's a policy question, it comes to me. She reached into her jacket pocket and put her card on the equipment tray. That's my direct line. Terrence stared at the card. He recognized the name. She saw it happen the specific moment when his understanding of who was standing in front of him rearranged itself completely. His mouth opened, closed. Yes, he said. Of course, Daniel was already moving. He paused at the bay entrance and looked back at her, a quick, full look, the same one he'd given her on the dock. Reading her, making sure he'd understood what had just happened correctly. She gave him a small nod. Go. He went. She stood in the hum of the facility and watched him go and thought about a boy alone in a lit-up house, and a man driving 10 minutes through a Colorado Springs night. And something settled in her chest that felt like a decision, but was also something else. Something older and quieter than a decision. She turned to Terrence. Get me the parts number for the Line 4 belt component. We're ordering it tonight. Terrence stared. Tonight? Is there a reason we can't order a part at 11:30 p.m.? No. Technically, I can log it as an emergency procurement, if log it however you need to. Get me the number. Terrence got her the number. She called the operations procurement line herself. Personally, which produced 30 seconds of stunned silence from the overnight procurement coordinator before the order was placed. She stayed on the floor for another hour. She talked to 4 more people. She filled 2 more pages of her notepad. At 1 in the morning, she sat in her rental car in the parking lot and looked at her notes and thought about the parallel lives that had been happening simultaneously without her knowledge. Her life, at the top of a glass building signing summaries, and Daniel's life on an overnight floor, filing improvement reports into what must have felt like a void, carrying a flat stone for his son's engineering products and a full technical assessment for a company whose CEO had never come to look. She thought about Eli alone in a lit house waiting for his father. She thought about Daniel's voice on the phone, 10 minutes. "I promise," and the way that promise had sounded like the most load-bearing thing a person could say. She picked up her phone, pulled up the HR directory, found the number for the regional HR director, and saved it for the morning. Then she found, after a moment's consideration, the general employee contact number for the Colorado Springs facility. She typed out a message to the facility's internal communication system, the one that went directly to employee inboxes. Not through management filters. She wrote, "My name is Victoria Hartwell. I'm the CEO of Hartwell Wellness Group. I was on your floor tonight. I read your exit surveys, your incident reports, and your improvement submissions. I'm sorry it took me this long. Things are going to change. If you have something to say that hasn't been heard, I want to hear it. My direct email is below." She read it twice. Sent it. Then she sat in the dark parking lot and breathed. Her phone lit up 11 minutes later. An email from an address she didn't recognize. Subject line blank, Ms. Hartwell. The Line 3 pulley system has a safety issue that's been in the report queue for 9 months. I have documentation. Who do I send it to? She typed back immediately. Send it directly to me. The reply came in 40 seconds. The documentation was thorough, detailed, and clearly the work of someone who had been maintaining it with the patient precision of a person who believed that eventually, someone would ask. The employee's name was in the signature line. It was not Daniel. There were 12 more emails before she finally drove back to the hotel at 2:15 in the morning. 12 different people on the overnight shift of a single facility who had things to say that hadn't been heard, and who, when given a direct line to the person who could actually do something, used it within the same hour. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed and looked at her phone and thought about what Daniel had said at the fire pit. The people who keep your company alive don't know if you know they exist. She thought about how that sentence had landed when he said it, how she had felt it in the honest place rather than the professional place. She understood it differently now, not as a philosophical observation, as a structural failure with a specific cost and a specific repair. She was going to fix it. She lay back on the bed, thought about Daniel driving through the night to his son, thought about a 5-year-old turning on every light in the house because his dad said it was okay to, because his dad said 10 minutes and meant it like a vow. She thought about Daniel at work tomorrow, or maybe not tomorrow, depending on what Terrence had documented or not documented, depending on whether the overnight absence had been handled she'd instructed, or whether something in the administrative process had gone sideways. She sat up, called Terrence directly. He answered on the second ring, which told her he'd been awake. "Brooks," she said, "is his employment status clear for tomorrow?" A pause. Yes, I marked it as an approved family emergency. No disciplinary flag. Thank you." She paused. "How long has he been on your crew?" 7 months, Terrence said. Then after a beat, "He's the best tech I've got. I want you to know that. I've been trying to get his role reclassified for 5 months. The request is sitting somewhere in the regional approval chain. 5 months. She wrote it down. "I'll take care of it." She hung up. She lay back on the bed. 7 months on an overnight floor. Fixing equipment that should have been fixed long before he got there. Filing reports into what must have felt like shouting into a building that couldn't hear. And doing it anyway because someone had to, and he was the person who understood that. The same way he'd watched Eli on the dock. The same way he'd carried a flat stone. the same way he'd driven 10 minutes through a Colorado Springs night with absolute certainty about what mattered most. She stared at the ceiling. And for the first time since she'd started this company, she didn't feel like a CEO looking down at a problem. She felt like a person standing beside one, close enough to see exactly what it was made of, and what it needed, and who had been trying to fix it all along. While nobody was watching, she was back in Denver by 9 the next morning. Not because she'd slept, she hadn't. Not really. Maybe 2 hours on the hotel mattress with her phone face up beside her, because she'd told 12 people on an overnight shift to email her directly, and she was going to be the kind of person who followed through on that. By 6 a.m., she'd read every message twice, responded to 9 of them, and started a document she titled simply Colorado Springs Real that she distinguished in her mind from the folder Greg Sauer had brought her, which she was now thinking of as Colorado Springs Presented. The difference between those two documents was the difference between what a company looked like from a distance and what it actually was up close. And she was done, entirely and permanently done, living in the first version. She called Greg Sauer at 7:15 from the hotel parking lot. He picked up on the third ring with the voice of someone who had been awake for a while and expecting a call. Colorado Springs, she said. I need the regional director's calendar cleared for a call at 10. I need Terrence, the overnight floor manager, on the same call. And I need you on it. A pause. Victoria, I want to be transparent. I was in contact with the regional office last night, after you arrived at the facility. I wanted to make sure there was appropriate context. She went very still. You told them I was coming. The pause this time was different in quality. Smaller, tighter. I felt it was appropriate to Greg. She kept her voice level. This was a skill she had developed early and maintained rigorously, the ability to communicate the full weight of a thing without raising the volume. I specifically asked you not to announce my visit. I understand. But did you, Victoria? Did you tell the regional director I was coming? Yes or no? The pause told her before the word did. Yes. She looked at the parking lot, at the ordinary morning light of a Colorado Springs Thursday, the kind that didn't know or care about the conversation happening inside a rental car. She breathed. She made the specific internal decision that separated responding from reacting, which she'd learned from a crisis management consultant 6 years ago and had never needed more than in this moment. Be on the call at 10, she said. Bring every operational report from that facility for the last 18 months. Not summaries, the actual reports. She hung up. She sat with the particular cold clarity of a person who has just identified a problem that is larger than they thought. And she added a new column to the document on her phone. She titled it, Why This Happened, and began filling it in with the calm, precise movements of someone who intends to fix something at the root rather than the surface. The 10 o'clock call lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. The regional director, a man named Patrick Ellsworth, 53, Yale MBA, 8 years with the company, discovered in the first 20 minutes that his carefully prepared briefing, built on the assumption of a standard compliance review, was not adequate preparation for a CEO who had spent the previous night talking directly to 12 floor employees and had their specific documented concerns in front of her. The Line 3 pulley report, she said, 12 minutes into the call. Walk me through what happened to it after it was first filed. A silence that lasted 4 seconds too long. I'd have to pull that specific. It was filed 9 months ago, she said, by an employee on the overnight shift. It cited a specific mechanical safety issue. It was refilled at month 4 and month 7. I have all 3 submissions in front of me. What happened to them in your office? Another silence. Terrence, to his credit, said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Patrick, she said, I'm not asking this to corner you. I'm asking because I need to understand the path something travels between when an employee identifies a problem and when it gets fixed, so I can understand where that path breaks. Help me understand. He helped her understand. It took 35 minutes of uncomfortable, specific, non-summary version explanation, and what she learned was not that Patrick Ellsworth was a bad importance or a negligent director. What she learned was that he was managing a span of control that was too wide, with a reporting structure that rewarded smooth upward communication over accurate upward communication, and that he had been doing it for long enough that the difference between the two had stopped being visible to him. 1. He was optimizing for the version of the facility that looked good from his desk, because that was what the structure he worked in rewarded. She'd built that structure, not on purpose, not with malice, but she'd built a company that grew faster than its own accountability architecture. And somewhere in that growth, the distance between her office and her floors had become so vast that the information traveling upward had to be translated, summarized, and filtered through so many layers that by the time it reached her, it was no longer the same information. It was a story told about information, a representation of a situation, a number attached to an idea, not a person, not 12 people, not Denise at the scanner, or the anonymous employee who'd sent her the first email, or Daniel filing his 4th report at midnight, because someone had to. At the end of the call, she said 3 things. She said the line 3 pulley issue would be addressed by Friday with a full maintenance audit of all equipment at the facility scheduled for the following week. She said Terrence would be provided with direct escalation access to her operations team that bypassed the regional tier for anything safety related. And she said Patrick would be moved to a different role, not fired, not demoted, restructured, a position with a narrower scope that matched his actual bandwidth, which she phrased carefully and honestly, and without cruelty, because cruelty was not the point and had never been the point. The point was that the system had to change. Greg Sauer was on that call. He was quiet through most of it. After she ended it, he called her back within 4 minutes. "I want to say something," he said. "Go ahead." "I called Patrick because I thought I was protecting the company," he said. "I want you to know that. I know it wasn't malicious." "Greg, but it was wrong." "Yes, it was." Another pause. Shorter. "You're not fired," she said. "You're going to help me fix this. Because you understand the operational architecture better than anyone else I have. And what I need right now is someone who can see exactly where it broke and help me rebuild it correctly." The pause this time had a different quality. Surprise moving into something that sounded, carefully, like relief. He said, "I can do that." "Good. My office. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Bring the org chart and don't filter anything." She hung up. She looked at her phone for a moment. Then she pulled up a number she'd saved 2 nights ago, Daniel's cell, which he'd given her the last morning at the resort. Casually, in the way people exchange numbers when they expect to stay in contact and aren't making a production of it. She looked at it. She put the phone down. Not yet. There was something she needed to do first, and it needed to be done in the right order. Because doing it in the wrong order would make it exactly what Daniel had said. He didn't want it to be special treatment because of a conversation at a lake. What she was about to offer him could not look like favoritism. It had to be undeniably, structurally, documentably what it actually was, which was the correct placement of a person whose talent had been visible to everyone around him and invisible to everyone above him, in a role that matched what he actually was, rather than what his job title said. She called HR, not the regional HR director, her chief people officer Adriana Reyes, 41, who had joined Hartwell 3 years ago from a tech company where she'd built a talent identification system that had become a case study at Stanford. Adriana was, in Victoria's considered assessment, the most underutilized person on her executive team, because the structures above and below her hadn't given her function enough access to actually do what she was capable of. That was also going to change. "I need a talent review," Victoria said, "of every facility's employee in the maintenance and technical operations classification at Colorado Springs. Full competency mapping. Not performance reviews, actual competency mapping. The kind that identifies what someone can do versus what their job description says they should be doing." Adriana was quiet for a moment. Victoria could hear her thinking the specific quality of silence that comes before a person says something they've wanted to say for a while. I've been trying to get budget approval for a cross-facility competency mapping project for 2 years, she said. Victoria felt something in her chest contract. I know. I'm sorry it took this long. Adriana paused, choosing the question carefully. Is this about a specific individual or a systemic initiative? Both, Victoria said. In that order. I want it done correctly. I want it documented so that any action taken is based on the assessment and not on any other factor. Can you do that? I can absolutely do that, Adriana said. And the energy in her voice had shifted to something sounded that's like a person who had been waiting for permission and had finally gotten it. One person specifically, Victoria said. Employee ID 4471. His name is Daniel Brooks. Start there. And, Adriana, I need this done in a way that can withstand any scrutiny about the process. If what I expect to find is there, I want it to be visible to anyone who looks. Understood, Adriana said. I'll have a preliminary assessment by end of week. She had it by Wednesday. It was 14 pages, and it contained, in the careful clinical language of formal competency mapping, the professional portrait of a person who had been significantly, systematically, and for an extended period operating well below his assessed capability level. It documented his technical qualifications, which were extensive, extending into areas that his job title hadn't required and that he'd maintained on his own time. It documented his problem-solving history at the facility, the improvement reports, the informal fixes, the 11 instances in 7 months where he had identified and resolved equipment issues that had been ongoing before his arrival. It included a section called Demonstrated Leadership Indicators that cited 6 specific instances where co-workers had sought his guidance or assistance outside the formal chain of responsibility. Adriana had attached a single note to the report. It said, "This person should not be in this role. He should be managing it." Victoria read it 3 times. Then she called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. He sounded like someone who was outdoors. She could hear wind and, faintly, Eli's voice in the background, asking something about whether lunch was ready. "Hey," he said. His voice was careful in the way it had been the first time she'd called him by his full name. The night at the fire pit. The voice of a person who is ready for something to be complicated. "How's Eli?" she asked first. Something relaxed in his voice. Not completely, but enough to notice. "He's good, Mrs. Delgado is okay. She broke her wrist, but she's home, and she's stubborn enough that she'll be back to normal in a week. She keeps calling to apologize to Eli." He paused. He told her he wasn't mad because accidents happen and it wasn't her fault. Victoria felt the smile happen before she could manage it. Of course he did. He's a better person than I am at 5 than I am at 37. He had a good teacher, she said. A pause. She heard him move. The wind quality changed. Like he'd stepped somewhere more enclosed. Victoria. "Yeah, I've been thinking about the other night, so have. I need to know something." His voice was direct. The way he was always direct, not aggressive. Just clear. The directness of someone who doesn't have energy for ambiguity. "Did what happened with Eli, did my leaving early, is my job okay?" "Your job is fine," she said. "Terrence handled it correctly. There's no flag on your record." She heard the breath leave him. Not dramatic quiet. The exhale of a person who has been carrying a specific weight and has just had it removed. "Okay," he said. "Thank you. I also had your role reclassification request approved," she said. "The one Terrence submitted 5 months ago. It'll reflect in next pay period." Silence. "Victoria, it's the correct classification for what you actually do," she said. Terrence had it right when he submitted it. It got stuck in the approval chain. And now it's unstuck. And now it's unstuck. She heard him think. Heard the specific quality of his silence. Not grateful silence. Not suspicious silence. Something more careful than either of those. "Is that the thing you called to tell me?" "No," she said. "That's not the main thing." "Okay." She could hear him preparing himself. Steady. The way he was always steady. Adriana Reyes, my chief people officer, conducted a competency assessment on your role and your history at the facility. I want to be very clear that this was conducted properly, documented thoroughly, and would look appropriate to anyone who reviewed the process. I asked for it to be bulletproof specifically because I knew I was going to have this conversation, and I didn't want either of us to be in a position where anyone could question how it was done. A pause. Okay. The assessment says you're operating about 3 levels below your actual capability. The pause this time was longer. 3 levels, he said. 3 levels. What does that mean in practical terms? It means I'd like to off position that matches what you actually are. She kept her voice even. Factual, the same tone she used in board meetings when she was posing something she'd already decided was right and was presenting it fully formed. Operations lead for facility optimization. It's a new role I'm creating it as part of a structural overhaul I'm initiating across all 4 facilities. The mandate is identifying and resolving systemic operational inefficiencies, working directly with facility teams and reporting to my operations VP. She paused. Not to the regional tier, directly to senior operations. Silence. You'd also work with me directly on the broader culture initiative I'm starting, she said. Because what I found at Colorado Springs isn't unique to that building. It's a pattern, and fixing a pattern requires someone who's been inside it. More silence. Long enough that she checked her phone to make sure the call was still connected. Daniel, I'm here. His voice was different now. She couldn't immediately classify the difference. Only that something had moved in it. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly. That's all I've got, she said. Is this because of the lake? Because of the conversation? Because you feel like you owe me something for no, she said. It came out clean and immediate. No preamble, no softening. The question deserved a real answer, and real answers don't need decoration. It's because of 14 pages of documented competency assessment that Adriana spent 3 days compiling. It's because of 4 improvement reports that were accurate and actionable and went nowhere. It's because Terrence, who does not know you, came to a lake in September, told me independently that you're the best tech he has and that he's been trying to get your role reclassified for 5 months. She paused. The lake is why I went to the floor. What I found when I got there is the actual basis for this conversation. Another pause. Shorter this time. Okay, he said. Is that a yes? That's a I need to think about it. She had expected that. Take until Friday. I need to understand the full picture, he said. The role, the responsibilities, the impact on Eli's schedule. I can't take something that puts me back in the position I was in at the engineering job. I won't do that. I know, she said. And I'm not asking you to. The role has flexibility built in. That was a specific design parameter I gave Adriana when we were structuring it. Because I understand what it costs when someone can't be where they need to be. A long pause. When he spoke again, his voice had the careful, layered quality of a person managing several large feelings at once, with characteristic restraint. You designed flexibility into the role. Yes. Before you even knew if I'd take it. Yes. Why? She held the phone and looked at the Denver skyline out her office window and thought about how to answer a question that had more than one true answer. She chose the one that was most true, because that's what the role should have always had. And because if the person filling it is someone with a kid, they deserve to know the company understands what that means. And because she stopped, started again, because I saw you answer Eli's phone call on that floor. And I watched you make a decision in about 3 seconds that most people spend weeks agonizing over. And the clarity you had in that moment about what mattered, that's not a liability. That's the kind of judgment I want, making operational decisions. She heard him breathe. Friday, she said. Take until Friday. Okay, he said. Quiet. Something underneath it that she didn't try to name. She heard Eli in the background again, louder now. The sound of a small person who has run out of patience about lunch. Daniel laughed, that real laugh, the one that came up before he could shape it. I have to go, he said. There's an infrastructure emergency. Go, she said. And this time it was different from the night at the facility. This time it was warmer. "Tell him I said hi. He'll want to tell you about the new dock design. I genuinely want to hear it." She hung up. She sat for a moment, with the phone in her hand, and something in her chest that was not the hollow applause in an empty theater feeling. Something warmer and more specific than that. Something that had weight. He called back Thursday evening. She was still at the office. It was 6:40. Which was early by her recent standards, a thing she was actively working on, and his name on her screen produced a response in her nervous system that she observed with interest and did not entirely suppress. "Thursday," he said. "I said Friday, I know. Eli went to bed early and I couldn't stop thinking." "So," she leaned back in her chair. "And I have questions. I expected questions. The reporting structure," he said. "You said directly to senior operations. Does that mean I'm in the room when facility decisions are made? Or does it mean I'm informing decisions that are made somewhere else by someone else?" "In the room," she said. "That's the whole point. The problem at Colorado Springs, and I expect at every other facility, is that the people with the best operational knowledge are the furthest from the decision-making. That's what I'm fixing. So yes, in the room." "Okay," she heard him moving, pacing. "Maybe the way people pace when they're thinking through something that matters. The flexibility. You said it was built into the role. Define that. Core hours are Nebelbish based on operational need. There'll be travel facility visits, probably 1 or 2 per month but with advance notice. Not emergency calls at 6 p.m. And there's a dependent care supplement in the compensation package, which covers emergency caregiver costs because those are real and they're not a personal problem, they're a systemic one." Silence. "A dependent care supplement. Yes. Hartwell doesn't currently have that in any of its non-executive packages. It does as of next month," she said. "I'm implementing it company-wide. The Colorado Springs situation made the gap visible. We're closing it." More silence. Different in quality from the other silences, this one had the texture of a person arriving somewhere they hadn't expected to be. Standing at the entrance of it, deciding whether to go in. "Victoria. Yeah. You're changing company policy because of what happened to Eli's caregiver. I'm changing company policy because it was wrong. What happened to Eli's caregiver made it impossible to keep pretending I didn't know." He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she waited it out, which she was better at now than she'd been a month ago. She'd been practicing the particular patience of a person who learned that the best things sometimes need room to breathe before they can be spoken. "I'll take it," he said. She let one beat go by. "Yeah?" A pause. "On one condition." "Name it." "You come to the floor," he said. "Not once, not for a compliance review. Regularly. You stay close enough to the ground that you never again have to drive to a lake resort to remember you're a human being." She felt the sentence land exactly where he aimed it, with warmth and precision and the specific accuracy of someone who understands both the wound and the repair. "Deal," she said. She could hear him smiling. She couldn't see it. She knew it was there. "Friday," he said. "I'll sign whatever I need to sign. Adriana will have everything ready. Tell her I said thank you." "Tell her yourself," she said. "She's the one who called you 3 levels below capability. She'll want you to know she meant it, as a compliment." He laughed. "The real one." After she hung up, she sat at her desk for a while and did not move toward the next thing on her list, which was unusual enough that Priya, passing her open office door at 6:50, slowed, looked in, assessed, and said nothing, because Priya was very good at her job and could identify the difference between a problem and a person sitting with something good. The next morning, Daniel Brooks came to the Denver office to sign his offer letter. He wore a button-down shirt that was clearly recently pressed, which made her think about who'd pressed it and when, and she dismissed the thought with more effort than she expected. He sat across from Adriana in a conference room on the 3rd floor and read every page of the offer letter, which took 11 minutes and which Adriana later described to Victoria as the most thorough offer letter review she'd conducted in 15 years of HR work. He asked 4 specific questions. He got 4 direct answers. He signed. Then Adriana brought him to Victoria's office. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She was at her desk and she looked up and he looked at her. And for a second, neither of them said anything. The office was large, the kind of large that communicates authority. All clean lines and glass and a view of Denver that had made financial journalists and competitors feel various versions of impressed and intimidated. It probably looked different to him than it looked to those people. She found she wanted to know how it looked. "You didn't decorate," he said. She glanced around. "What? There's nothing personal in here. It all looks—" He paused, searching for the word. "Curated." She looked at her office with the specific fresh attention of someone who has just been shown a thing that was always there. He was right. The awards were there. The press covers, framed tastefully. The company mission statement rendered in a font a designer had chosen. There were no photographs, no objects that weren't also credentials. "My therapist said the same thing 6 months ago," she said. "I told her it was minimalism, is it?" She held his gaze. "No," she said. "I think I forgot to bring myself to work." He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her desk. Not the chair visitors usually used, that one was slightly to the left, in the traditional supplicant position. He took the one directly across from her, the one that implied equality, which no one had sat in before without being invited. She didn't correct him. She found she didn't want to. "So," he said, "where do we start?" She opened the document she'd been building since Colorado Springs, what actually needs to change, and turned her monitor so he could see it. "Here," she said. He leaned forward. "Read it." His eyes moved quickly down the list, and she watched his face cycle through recognition and agreement, and the specific expression of a person's seeing their own observations reflected back in a form that has institutional weight behind it. He pointed at one item halfway down the list. "This one," he said. "The communication path restructure. This needs to come before the staffing tier changes, not after. If you change the tiers without first fixing how information travels, you'll just replicate the problem at a different level." She looked at the document. He was right. She moved the item. "This one," he said, pointing to another. "You need floor representatives in the quarterly planning sessions. Not to present, to listen and be heard. People need to know the room where decisions are made is a room they can reach." She added a note. "That's going to push back from the board." Why? Because it changes the optics of who has access to strategy conversations. He looked at her. "Is that a reason not to do it?" She looked back at him. "No, then do it." She wrote it in. They worked for 3 hours. Not with the dynamic of a CEO and a new employee, not with the formal choreography of authority and deference. They worked like two people who were both trying to fix the same thing and happened to have different angles on it. And neither angle was more important than the other, because neither of them alone was enough. At one point, Greg Sauer knocked on the open door, saw the two of them bent over her screen with the unself-conscious focus of a working session, and retreated silently, without saying whatever he'd come to say. Victoria noticed but didn't stop. Whatever it was could wait. At 3 o'clock, Daniel looked at his phone, said, "I have to get Eli from school," and stood up with the same unperformed ease with which he did everything. "Go," she said. He went. At the door he turned back. "Victoria, yeah, this is going to work," he said simply, without salesmanship or performance. The way he said true things. "I know," she said. He left. She turned back to her screen. Outside her office window, Denver went on, doing what it did, existing at its own scale, indifferent to any individual drama inside any individual glass building. She looked at the list on her screen. She thought about the 12 people who had emailed her from an overnight floor. She thought about Denise at the scanner and the anonymous employee who'd been maintaining a 9-month safety report in case someone ever came to look. She thought about Terrence saying he's the best tech I've got, with the quiet conviction of someone who had been trying to say it to the right person for months. She thought about a man on a dock, watching his son. She picked up her phone and called Priya. "Can you order something for my office? Something personal. A plant, a photo, anything that looks like a human being lives here. A beat. What kind of photo? She thought about it. Something with water in it, she said. A lake, maybe. She heard Priya smile through the phone. I'll take care of it. She set the phone down and looked at the list. There was a lot of work to do. More than she could catalog in a single document. More than could be fixed in a single quarter. The structure that had allowed 41% turnover and 9-month safety reports, and 4 ignored improvement memos to exist, was not built in a day and would not be dismantled in one. But it would be dismantled, because now she was on the ground. And the ground was the only place from which anything that mattered had ever actually been built. She thought about what Daniel had said the very first time she'd really listened to him. Not on the dock, not at the fire pit, in the manufacturing facility, at 11 o'clock at night, when she'd asked him why he kept filing reports that weren't being answered. She hadn't understood it fully until right now, sitting in an office that was about to have a plant in it, and a picture of a lake, with 3 hours of real work behind her, and a company that was, for the first time in 4 years, about to feel the presence of the person who was supposed to be running it. He'd said, the people on this floor had been here longer than me, and would be here after me. And if there was even a 10% chance someone would read it and fix one thing, that was worth an hour of my night. She understood now what that was. Not optimism, not stubbornness, not idealism. It was the specific, load-bearing, utterly unglamorous choice to keep showing up. Even when the room couldn't hear you. Even when the distance was too far. Even when the person who should have been paying attention wasn't. It was the choice she was making now. And she was beginning to understand, the only choice that had ever produced anything worth keeping. 3 months after Daniel Brooks signed his offer letter, the Colorado Springs facility had a 41% turnover rate that had dropped to 19. The Line 3 pulley system had been repaired. The scanner on Line 2 had been replaced. The vending machines in the break room worked. These were small things. Individually. Together they were a statement, and the people on that floor understood what Oates said, not because anyone had put it in a memo, but because the things that had been broken for months were now fixed. And the person responsible for fixing them had been someone who used to work beside them. Word travels fast on a floor. Faster than any corporate communication Victoria had ever sent. She knew this because Daniel had told her, and Daniel had told her because he was now the person whose job it was to know what was actually happening at floor level, across all 4 facilities. And he was extraordinarily good at it in the way that people are good at things they were built for and have been waiting to be allowed to do. The board meeting in November was the first one Victoria had attended in 4 years, where she brought someone from below the VP tier into the room. She'd told the board 2 weeks in advance that she was doing this, which produced 4 separate calls from 4 separate board members, who each used different to say the same thing, that it was unconventional, that it would shift the dynamic, that perhaps a written report would be equally effective. She'd listened to all 4 calls with the patients she'd been developing, and said the same thing to each of them. Unconventional is how we ended up with a 19% improvement in 90 days. And I'd like the board to hear directly from the person who made that happen. Daniel sat at the board table in a dark blue jacket that Eli had apparently told him looked serious but not boring, which Victoria knew because Daniel had relayed this assessment in the elevator on the way up with the expression of a man who takes his 5-year-old's fashion opinions as legitimate input. He presented for 22 minutes. He used data his own, compiled with the same meticulous patience that had produced 4 improvement reports into a void, now directed at an audience that was required to listen. He showed the correlation between specific operational changes and retention improvement. He showed the cost analysis of the scanner replacement versus the productivity loss from the workaround. He showed the safety incident data before and after the pulley repair and framed it not as a win but at the baseline, the floor, from which actual improvement could now begin. At the end, Richard Chamberlain, the board member who'd been the most resistant, who'd used the word unconventional 4 times on their call, leaned forward and said, "How many of these situations exist across the other 3 facilities?" Daniel looked at him steadily. "Based on my assessment so far, each facility has between 8 and 15 systemic issues that have been identified by floor staff and not resolved. The aggregate cost of those unresolved issues in turnover, productivity loss, and safety exposure is higher than the cost of fixing all of them." Chamberlain was quiet for a moment. "Do you have that in writing?" "I have 47 pages of it," Daniel said. "I can send it to you tonight." After the meeting, when the board members were filing out and various assistants were gathering presentation materials, Chamberlain stopped beside Victoria near the door. He was 71, silver-haired, the kind of man who had sat in rooms like this for 40 years and had very specific instincts about people after all that time. "Where did you find him?" he said. She looked at him. "He found me," she said. "I just finally showed up close enough for it to happen." Chamberlain looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Then he nodded the short, specific nod of a person who has recognized something true. "Keep doing whatever you're doing," he said, and left. Daniel was at the far end of the conference table, gathering his materials when she crossed the room to him. He didn't look up immediately. He didn't look in. He was stacking papers with the efficient economy of a person who does not perform their feelings for an audience, and was clearly writing through the last 22 minutes in his head, checking it, assessing it, the same way he checked a belt tension calibration. "Daniel." He looked up. "Chamberlain wants your 47 pages, she said. He nodded once. "I'll send them tonight. He's going to want to talk to you directly after he reads them." "Okay." "He's not easy to talk to. I've talked to harder people," he said. And the way he said it without performance, just fact, made her think of an overnight floor and 4 reports and a man who kept showing up even when no one was watching. "You were good in there," she said. He shook his head. "The data was good. I just read it correctly." She looked at him. "You know you can take a compliment." "I know." He met her eyes. Something in his expression shifted very slightly. The way it did when the professional layer thinned and what was underneath it got closer to the surface. "Thank you. For the room." She held his gaze. "Thank you for what you did with it." They stood there for a moment in the empty conference room with the Denver skyline behind them and the residue of a meeting that had gone better than she'd planned. And something moved in the air between them that neither of them acknowledged directly, because neither of them was ready yet, and they both knew it, and that was okay. Because some things don't need to be rushed toward. Some things earn their timing. "I have to get Eli," he said. "I know. He wants to tell you about the new dock design," he said. "He's been planning it for 3 weeks. I want to hear it," she said. And she meant it exactly as much as she had the first time she'd said it. He picked up his materials. At the door he stopped. Turned back. This was becoming a thing he did, the stop at the door. The turn, the one last thing. She'd started looking forward to it, without admitting she was doing so. "Victoria. Yeah, you looked different in there than you did at the lake." She tilted her head slightly. "Different how?" He considered it. "Like you were in the right room." She felt that sentence settle into her chest like something fitting into the space it was designed for. She held it there for a moment. "Go get your kid," she said. He went. She stood in the empty conference room for a while after that. She thought about the lake. About 11 minutes of nothing, and then a splashing sound, and a little boy in an enormous life jacket investigating aquatic architecture. She thought about who she'd been sitting in that Adirondack chair, exhausted and hollow and running so fast she'd outpaced herself. She tried to locate distance between that version of herself and the one who had just sat at the head of a board table and brought someone from the floor into the room and meant it. Not as a gesture, but as a structural change. The distance was 3 months. The distance was also enormous. The distance was the difference between a life she was performing and one she was actually living. And she was still learning what that meant every single day, but she was learning it. Which was something. Her phone buzzed. Priya. Board dinner confirmed for 7. And the plant in your office is looking healthy, for the record. She smiled. She'd named the plant Harold. Priya had not questioned this. She typed back, "Tell Harold I'll be there by 6:30. She left the conference room. She went to her office, and she looked at the framed photograph on the shelf beside Harold, a lake. Early morning, the water flat and gold, the far shore reflected in it with the kind of clarity that seems almost too honest. She'd found it at a gallery in Denver 2 months ago and bought it without deliberating, which was how she was trying to make decisions now. Quickly, from the gut, trusting the thing that recognized itself. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called her therapist. Dr. Elaine Morse picked up on the second ring. "Victoria." "I have something to report," Victoria said. "I'm listening. I think I might be building a life I actually want to live inside of." A pause. The particular pause of a therapist who is allowing something to be fully said before responding. "Tell me about it," she told her. Not all of it. Some of it was still being formed. Still finding its language, still becoming the story. She would eventually know how to tell. But enough. She told her about the lake and the dock, and 7 words that had rearranged something. She told her about the floor and the 12 emails and the 47 pages. She told her about a board meeting and a man who said, "You were standing between me and the one person I never want to lose sight of," and had meant his son, and had also, without intending to, described something about how to live. Dr. Morse said at the end, "What do you think changed?" Victoria thought about it genuinely. The way she was trying to think about all of it now, not quickly, not efficiently, not for the purpose of generating an acceptable answer, but actually. "I stopped optimizing for the version of myself that looked successful," she said finally, "and started paying attention to the one that was actually there." A pause. "That's good work, Victoria." "It's a start," she said. She hung up. She looked at Harold. Harold looked back at her with the quiet dignity of a plant that knows it is in the right office. The December board review produced something Victoria had not expected, which was that the results from Colorado Springs, combined with Daniel's 47-page assessment of systemic issues across all 4 facilities, generated a unanimous vote to fund a company-wide operations integrity initiative. It was the initiative that Adriana had been trying to get approved for 2 years. It passed in 14 minutes of board discussion, which was the fastest the board had reached consensus on anything in Victoria's tenure. Adriana cried. Not in the meeting after it, in Victoria's office, sitting across from the desk in the chair that implied equality, with her shoes off and a cup of tea in her hands. The specific crying of a person who has been trying to do something right for a long time and has finally been given the tools to do it. Victoria sat across from her and did not say anything for a while because there was nothing that needed to be said. And she was getting better at knowing the difference. 4 years, Adriana said finally. "I've been trying to get this approved for 4 years. "I know," Victoria said. "I'm sorry it took me that long to understand what you were asking for." Adriana wiped her eyes. "How did this happen? What changed?" Victoria looked at Harold. "I went to a lake resort," she said. Adriana stared at her. "I'll tell you the full story sometime," Victoria said. "The short version is that I got close enough to the ground to see what was actually there. Because of the Colorado Springs visit, because of a conversation that made me decide to make the visit." She paused. "Because someone asked me if I was okay and meant it as a real question. And I realized I didn't have a real answer." Adriana looked at her with the expression of someone adding information to an incomplete picture and arriving at a preliminary conclusion. "Daniel Brooks," she said. Victoria met her eyes. "The assessment you wrote was the basis for everything that followed." "I know," Adriana said. "But you asked me to write it because of him. And everything you've done since then." She stopped. Tilted her head. "He's different with you, you know, than he is with anyone else at the company." Victoria chose not to engage with that directly. "How so?" "He's careful with everyone," Adriana said. "But with you, I don't know. Like someone who is paying attention in a particular way." She picked up her tea. I'm just observing, noted, Victoria said. Adriana smiled. Put her shoes back on. Left. Victoria looked at Harold for a long time after that. The week before Christmas, Daniel's son came to the office. This was not planned. What was planned was a late afternoon meeting between Victoria and Daniel about the Q1 facility visit schedule, which had been going well until Daniel's phone rang at 3:15 with the school's number. And Victoria had watched his face do the fast sequence thing again. Recognition. Assessment, the rapid recalibration of a parent who has learned to read the difference between routine and emergency, and he'd said, Eli's sick, I have to. Go, she said. We'll finish this tomorrow. I can reschedule, Daniel. She looked at him. Go get your kid. He went. He came back 40 minutes later, with Eli, which had not been the plan, but which had become the plan, because Mrs. Delgado was still managing her wrist, and the backup caregiver wasn't available, and Eli had a fever of 101 and had, apparently, been very specific in his request to be wherever his dad was. Victoria was on a call when Priya knocked softly on her open door and made a face that communicated a situation of gentle complexity. Behind Priya, Victoria could see Daniel in the outer office with Eli on his lap. The boy wrapped in Daniel's jacket, looking the particular kind of miserable that a 5-year-old looks when they're sick enough to be still. She ended the call 3 minutes early, which was unprecedented. She went to the door of her office. Eli looked up. He was pale, and his eyes were a little glassy, and his hair was doing what hair does when a small person has been leaning against a parent for an extended period. He looked at her with the recognition of someone who knows a person from better circumstances. You're here, he said, with the gravity of someone for whom this was meaningful information. I'm here, she said. How are you feeling, bud? Bad, he said. Without any performance. Just the honest report of a person who is not feeling well and sees no reason to pretend otherwise. She looked at Daniel. Bring him in. There's a couch in the corner. Victoria. You don't have to. There's a couch in my office, and it is doing nothing, she said. Bring him in. Daniel carried Eli to the couch, the low, comfortable one that the interior designer had put in the corner and that Victoria had used approximately twice. Both times to lie down during migraines she refused to acknowledge. He settled Eli into it, with the practiced efficiency of a man who has arranged a sick child on a great number of surfaces, over a great number of difficult evenings. Eli accepted this arrangement without protest, which was itself a sign of how bad he felt. Priya appeared, with a glass of water and a blanket that she had sourced from somewhere with the quiet magic of an exceptional assistant. Victoria accepted both, brought them to the couch, handed the water to Eli. He took it with both hands the way small children do and drank carefully. Thank you, he said, very formal, very serious. You're welcome, she said, and sat on the edge of the low table across from the couch, which put her at his level. Daniel sat on the other end of the couch. He was watching Victoria with the same quality of attention he gave to everything that mattered to him, careful. Warm, slightly aching around the edges. She could feel it without looking directly at him. Can I see the new dock design? She asked Eli. He looked at her. Even sick, even glassy-eyed, this question produced a specific brightening. You remember, I told your dad I wanted to hear it. Eli sat up slightly, not all the way. Just enough to engage with something he cared about. It's a 2-level design, he said. The top level is for the shark when he wants to look around. The bottom level is for parking. The shark drow? He got his license, Eli said. With complete seriousness. I see. What kind of car? Eli considered this. Underwater, he said. It's a special kind. That makes sense, she said. What's the structural material for the second level? You'll need something that handles both air and water exposure. Eli stared at her. Then he looked at his dad, then back at her. Nobody ever asks about the materials, he said. Like this was a revelation. The materials are important, she said. Your dad told me that. He said you don't interrupt an engineer mid-project. Eli looked at Daniel with an expression that managed to convey, even through fever, something like pride. I use flat rocks for the platform and rope for the supports, he told Victoria. But I need a better adhesive because the rocks shift. Marine epoxy, Victoria said. Waterproof. It's what they use on actual docks. Eli absorbed this. Can I have some? I'll get some, she said. For the next project. He settled back against the cushion with the satisfied air of a person whose engineering consultation had been productive. His eyes were getting heavy. The fever and the warmth of the office and his father's presence beside him were doing their collective work. I like your office, he said drowsily. It has a plant. His name is Harold. That's a good name for a plant, Eli said. His eyes closed. Opened again briefly. You should get a fish. I'll consider it. Sharks are too big, he said. Almost asleep. For an office, good point. His eyes closed and stayed closed. His breathing evened out. Daniel looked at his son for a moment, with that particular expression, the one she'd first seen on the dock. That particular quality of watching, something you cannot believe you get to keep, and the office was quiet, except for the sound of Denver, 20 floors below, and Harold being Harold in his corner. Daniel looked at her. She looked at him. They were very close in the small geography of the space between the couch and the table. Close enough that the conversation they'd been having for 3 months, the one underneath all the operational reports and facility schedules and board presentations, the one that neither of them had directly named, was closer to the surface than it had been. Close enough that not saying it was its own kind of statement. Victoria, he said, quiet, not wanting to wake Eli. Yeah, I need to tell you something. She held still. When I was at the lake, he said, I wasn't planning on talking to anyone. I was going to take Eli to the water and do the thing I always try to do when I get a few days off, which is be completely and only where I am. He paused. And then you walked up to my dock and said something I did not expect and gave me an answer I apparently needed to give. And he stopped. And, she said, he looked at her. I didn't tell you everything that day. About the engineering job. About why I actually left. She waited. The facility where I worked, he said. Before the automotive plant, I left it because I saw the same thing I was seeing at Colorado Springs. The same pattern good people ignored, problems reported and buried. Management so far from the floor that the information never arrived correctly. He paused. I tried to fix it from the inside. I went up 3 levels. I put together a full operational assessment and presented it to the plant director. What happened? He thanked me for my initiative and told me the company would take it under advisement. A beat. I never heard anything about it again. 6 months later, there was an equipment failure on a line I'd flagged in my report. Someone got hurt. Not seriously, but hurt. She went very still. I left the next week, he said, because I couldn't be in a building where I had seen the problem and said the problem and been ignored, and then watched the problem become real. He looked at his hands. I've been looking for a place where someone would actually listen ever since. Where the information could travel both ways. Where saying the right thing to the right person would produce a result instead of a form response. She heard all of it. The whole shape of it. 3 facilities in 4 years and 4 improvement reports, and a man who kept showing up, even when the room couldn't hear. Because he'd seen once what happened when no one did, and had decided he would not be a person who stopped saying the true thing, just because it was inconvenient. Why didn't you tell me this at the lake? She said. He looked at her. Because at the lake, you were a person at a resort who needed to remember how to be a human being. You weren't my CEO yet. He paused. And because I didn't know yet if you were the kind of person who would do something about it. And now? He held her gaze for a moment that had weight in it. Now I know, he said. She sat with that. She sat with the whole of him, the flat rocks and the 47 pages, and the phone call in the dark and the specific way he had of saying things that were exactly true, and she made a decision that had been building for 3 months and was now simply, finally, ready to be made. Daniel, she said. Yeah, after Eli's better and the Q1 schedule is done, and the Adriana's initiative is off the ground, she stopped. Started again. Not because she was uncertain, because this was the kind of thing that deserved to be said correctly. I'd like to have dinner with you. Not a working dinner. A dinner where we put the operational reports away, and you tell me more about Rachel and I tell you more about my mother, and we find out who we are when we're not trying to fix anything." He was very quiet. "If that," she started. "Yes," he said. "Simple. Clean." The way he said things that were true. "That's a yes." She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she looked at Eli, asleep on her office couch with his cheek against the cushion and his father's jacket pulled over him. A 5-year-old engineer with a traveling shark and a 2-level dock design and better material intuition than half the people she employed. "He's going to be extraordinary," she said. "He already is," Daniel said. January arrived cold and specific, the way Colorado Januaries do. The Operations Integrity Initiative launched across all 4 facilities simultaneously, with Adriana leading implementation and Daniel traveling between sites with the same unhurried competence he brought to everything Fort Collins one week, Colorado Springs the next, the Denver hub midweek, the Pueblo facility every 3rd Thursday. Victoria tracked the metrics the way she tracked all metrics, now not as the primary story, but as evidence of the actual story, which was happening on floors and in break rooms, and in the small daily moments when someone felt heard and stayed. The turnover numbers continued to drop. The incident reports declined. The exit survey data, which she now read in full every month, began to change. Fewer references to management communication, more references to workplace culture, and then slowly, a new category emerging in the voluntary comments that Adriana flagged for her one Tuesday afternoon. "Look at this," Adriana said, setting her tablet on Victoria's desk. On the screen was a compilation of recent exit survey comments from employees who were leaving for reasons unrelated to the company retirement. Relocation, a spouse's job transfer. The voluntary comments section, which historically was largely blank, was now full. Victoria read the first 3. She had to stop and read them again. "Best place I've worked in 20 years. People actually listened here. I watched this company change in real time, and I'm proud I was part of it. Whoever fixed things, tell them, thank you from me." She looked up at Adriana. "Whoever fixed things," Adriana said quietly. Victoria set the tablet down. She thought about 11 minutes of nothing on a September afternoon, and a splashing sound, and a little boy in a life jacket, and 7 words. She thought about a fire pit and a 2-hour drive, and 12 emails in a parking lot at 1 in the morning. She thought about a boardroom and a 47-page document, and a plant named Harold and Marine Epoxy for an evolving dock design. She thought about a dinner 3 weeks ago, at a restaurant neither of them had been to before, where they had put the operational reports away, and he had told her about Rachel, really told her. The full version, the loud laugh, and the Wednesday afternoon, and the hospital parking garage. And she had told him about her mother and the seamstress and the bathroom stall and what happened in the 7 minutes on the floor. And they had talked for 4 hours.
The restaurant had begun to close around them,
without either of them noticing. And when they finally walked out into the January cold, he had stopped on the sidewalk and looked at her, the way he'd looked at her, on the dock, that full, unhurried, genuinely trying to understand look, and he had said, "I'm really glad you walked up to that dock." And she had said, "I'm really glad your son was building infrastructure." And he had laughed, the real one, and the January air had done what January air does. And she had thought, standing on a sidewalk in Denver, with her breath visible, and a man beside her who had been teaching her things for 4 months without ever calling it teaching, that this was what it felt like to be in the right place. At the right time, in the right version of yourself. It felt nothing like $1 billion. It felt considerably better. She looked at Adriana's tablet, at the 3 comments from people who were leaving, and still took the time to say, "Thank you." "Forward these to Daniel," she said. Adriana raised an eyebrow. "He'll deflect." "I know. Forward them anyway." His response came 11 minutes later. A single line. "Send them to the floor team. They're the ones who did it." She read it twice. She typed back, "Already did. You're next." She paused. Then added, "Eli's Marine Epoxy arrived. Front desk has it. His response came in 4 seconds. He's going to lose his mind. She sent back, good. She set the phone down. She looked at Harold. Harold had grown, which Priya noted weakly, with the proprietary satisfaction of someone who had sourced him and considered his well-being a professional success metric. The board called in February to discuss expansion. A 5th facility, possibly a 6th. They wanted her read on operational readiness, on the people infrastructure, on whether the model that had produced the Colorado Springs turnaround could be systematized. She said yes. She said yes with the confidence of a person who has identified the actual mechanism by which good things happen. Not the summary version, not the presented version, but the real version. The version where someone gets close enough to the ground to see what's actually there. She said yes, and then she said, I want Daniel Brooks in this conversation. Chamberlain said, obviously. She sat at the head of the table in the February board meeting and looked at the room 12 people, some of whom had called her unconventional 6 months ago, all of whom were now looking at turnover data and safety metrics and employee satisfaction scores that told a story no summary report could have produced, and she thought about who she'd been when she drove to a lake resort because her therapist had a phrase for what she'd become, and she couldn't argue with it. She thought about all the things that had to happen in exactly the order they happened for her to be in this room, at this table, with this data and this team, and this life she was actually living rather than performing. A lake, a dock, a boy with a life jacket, 7 words that were a correction and also an invitation. A fire pit, a parking lot at 1 a.m, with 12 emails loading on her screen. A man in a hard hat fixing a belt mechanism that had been broken for 22 days and had been reported 4 times and would have gone on being broken indefinitely if she hadn't gone to stand on the ground where the problem actually lived. And she understood, sitting at that table in February, with the whole shape of it visible to her, that none of it had been an accident, not the lake, not the wrong assumption about what he was looking at, not the 7 words that had stopped her cold. She had needed all of it, in precisely that sequence, because she had been moving so fast and so high and so disconnected from the ground that nothing softer would have reached her. She had needed someone who wasn't trying to impress her to say a true thing in plain language, and she had needed to be close enough and quiet enough to actually hear it. She had been ready, without knowing it, and the lake had been the place where the readiness met the moment. After the board meeting, she walked to the window and looked at Denver and thought about a second dinner they'd had last week, and a third planned for Saturday, and the way Eli had started calling her Victoria in the specific manner of a 5-year-old who has decided that a person is a permanent fixture in the landscape of his world. He'd said, last time she'd seen him, that he needed her engineering opinion on an upgrade to the dock design that involved a helicopter pad for visiting sea creatures who preferred air travel. She had said she'd think about it. She had already looked up helicopter pad structural requirements. For a dock, for an imaginary sea creature. She had done this with no irony whatsoever. And it had been one of the best 20 minutes she'd spent in recent memory. She turned from the window. Her phone was on the desk. She picked it up. She typed a message to Daniel. It said only, "Good meeting. You were right about the expansion timeline." His response came while she was still holding the phone. "I'm always right about timelines." Eli confirmed this. She typed, "Eli is biased." He typed, "Eli is objective." "He has no stake in my professional reputation." She typed. He named his dock the Daniel Brooks Memorial Engineering Complex. A pause. "Then that's not bias. That's accurate historical documentation." She laughed. In her office alone, on a February afternoon. She laughed, the way she'd laughed the first time on the dock, surprised. Genuine, ahead of any version she would have shaped for public consumption. She set the phone down. She looked at Harold. She looked at the photograph of the lake. The early morning water, the flat gold reflection of a sky that didn't know or care how much had happened beside a different lake in September. She looked at the city outside her window, and she thought about the woman who had driven 3 hours to a resort because she was running from something she couldn't name and had sat in an Adirondack chair trying to remember what it felt like to simply be somewhere. That woman had walked up to a dock with a presumptuous question and been answered with 7 words that were simultaneously a correction, a lesson, and the beginning of everything that followed. She had spent years building something everyone wanted to enter. She had finally built a life she wanted to live inside of. And the distance between those two things, the vast, exhausting, invisible distance she'd been running across for 4 years, had been closed, not by nat strategies or a board decision or a Forbes cover, but by a single dad on a September afternoon who knew exactly where to look because he had never stopped looking. That was the thing about people who understood what mattered. They didn't need a lake resort to remember it. They carried it with them. In jacket pockets, in flat stones, in the specific quality of attention they paid to the things and people they refused to lose sight of. Victoria Hartwell had built a billion-dollar company. But the most valuable thing she'd ever built was the life she finally started living. She stopped oft finding me between a father and his son, and instead sat down beside them, right there on the dock, and let herself be seen. That was where everything real began, and that was exactly where she intended to stay.